Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're all doing well as always. So yesterday on our stream we continued watching some lore videos surrounding the trailer for the DLC, and today we're going to be looking at somebody who's been like a longtime member of the community and their very first video in Elden Ring Secret Hidden God by Elden Enthusiast. So they definitely seem to be an enjoyer of Elden Ring, obviously, here. And just to kind of reiterate some disclaimers that I should probably do more frequently, but sometimes I forget, just getting in the flow state of things, in that the goal of like analyzing and reacting to other people's lore videos isn't necessarily to tear them down. It's to offer constructive feedback, to potentially gain new perspectives about how other people look at the lore, reconcile any differences between others' viewpoints and my viewpoints and or the chat's viewpoint, and to just kind of broaden and enrich the discourse surrounding the game. And sometimes it goes better than other times, but yeah. So with all that said and out of the way, the goal isn't to like break down Elden Enthusiast video or anybody's video, but sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And even when videos have a lot of stuff that we can disagree with, I think there's still a lot of things we can learn and appreciate about them. And so because this is Elden Enthusiast's first video, I think they want more constructive feedback also in the like art, I guess, if you want to call it that, of like editing videos and stuff. So I'll probably be a little bit more nitpicky about that just to give them more constructive feedback. And I'm not trying to just be like a jerk or anything like that. I know Elden Enthusiast is a little bit apprehensive about this, so I'm not going to like, you know, really try to tear them apart. Just try to help somebody better their craft based off of the things that I've learned. Because it definitely took me a while to get to where I am now, which, you know, isn't like super amazing, but it's definitely a far cry from where I began. So if I can point them in a positive direction, I'll be happy with that. Errant Vice, thank you so much for the 5. And everybody, welcome on in. Earthmind, Elden Enthusiast himself, Northern Tommy, nice to see you. Jesse R, Lavish Peasant, Arc Crusader. You forgot to fix the subs in the video, but they're like 99% accurate, so it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah, that can be pretty difficult. Did you use the auto YouTube caption devices, or did you like do it manually? Hey, Tony, how's it going, man? That's what you're looking for? Okay, yeah. And Level of It, nice to see you again. All right, so Errant Vice ran over his buddy's girlfriend's Minecraft Fox lamp after he told you that he was a Solaire Sandworm truther. I can't blame you there. All right, Necrofear, welcome on in. You never played Elden Ring, but you need to understand the freaking lore. Good luck with that. Yeah, I think it'd be kind of hard to contextualize a lot of things, although maybe not, depending if you're just like watching people's like playthroughs and whatnot. But yeah. All right, everybody. So let's go ahead and dive on into Elden Ring Secret Hidden God. This is a pretty long video, so I figure it might take up the full stream or the majority of it, and if we do have some time later, I might dive into the silly little Elden Ring GeoGuessr. Oh yeah, and then for tomorrow I am going to look at Jarhead's video. Damn it, what was it called? I need to look it up. I haven't even added it to my playlist yet. What are the Shadowlands? Shadow the Erdtree speculation. So he told me that this video that he produced was done before the trailer came out, and they kind of came out like at the same time or something like that. So to just like take a little bit of his predictions with a grain of salt there, because it was before we learned anything about the trailer. So we'll look at that video tomorrow, and depending on how much time, maybe Cosmos's DLC analysis, because we've had some suggestions to look at that. And then starting what today's Tuesday, right? Yeah. So starting Thursday, then I think that'll be the day that I begin Hollow Knight live on stream. So, all right, Pigsy, Santeria, nice to see both of you again. So Elden, you uploaded the text file, only half showed up, so you copy pasted manually. Oh man, that's kind of rough. That's better if you got to edit some discrepancies between some of what you recorded and typed. That's all. Yeah, so typically what I do when I go through the voice recording process, I have my script up. Actually, I could just like show you guys, huh? Maybe. Oh no. Yeah, let's not show you my secret projects. So for my last video, I made 2 of my drafts like public, and you could definitely see the differences between the final draft, or the second draft and like the final version that I like voiced. So what I would do is I will like read this stuff out loud, and if I revise things, then then I just like manually edit it on the fly as I go. So that's kind of like one bit of advice. So that way you can sync up your, oh yeah. And then once I like get done editing and like voice recording, then I just copy and paste all the like updated text into a new text file, and then export it into YouTube for the auto caption feature. Cause I don't know like how effective they are for like audience retention. So I don't like worry about it too much. So yeah. Okay. All right. The dog's chewing a bone under my seat. All right. Thank you so much for the extra 5, Vice. So that puts you at what? 675 now? I need to run tally. We were at 60 yesterday, I think, or 65, 70, 75. Yeah, okay. The Shadowlands or Londor and Velka, the real one, is also there. Also, Londor is when the killing of the first flame is in both games. Okay. All right, Vice. Rampage Snow White, welcome on in. Pixie asks, does the Japanese community make videos or go hard on the lore? Do they see things in a similar way to the Westerners? So I don't honestly keep up too much with like the Japanese community and like their lore videos. Maybe I should. I just like, honestly, I don't really watch like lore stuff even on my free time. Pretty much almost everything that I've seen has been on stream in regards to Elden Ring lore. But with that being said, I definitely do know that there are some like pretty big, Japanese content creators. What's the one dude's name? Like Narni, I think. I would need to remember, but he always has like on what's it called, like the Elite Knight helmet, or maybe it's not really an Elite Knight helmet, but he like wears like a literal helmet when he talks about lore and stuff. So do they see things in a similar way than Westerners? Yes and no. I mean, there's obviously differences. Like, I know like the Great Tree is a really big deal here in the West, but most Japanese people don't even think of a Great Tree in that kind of way. Not in like the proper noun type format. It just kind of like, yeah, it doesn't have that kind of weight in the Japanese and stuff like that. And then Eldon says, isn't there a big Italian YouTuber who's met with FromSoft devs or something before? I think you're talking about Sabaku no Maiku, or yeah, I think that's his name. I don't know if he's met the FromSoft devs, but I've heard of him through the grapevine from like some other Italian people. But yeah, I'm just not familiar myself. I should review Undead Hunter for laughs. I have no idea what Undead Hunter is. Is that like a game, a movie, an anime, or... All right, so sorry for stalling so long, Elden Enthusiast. Let's go ahead and dive on into your video. And let me know how the volume is for you guys. And should I read this?
What is a god in Elden?
Oh, sorry, I have a double speed on as usual. Right. Therefore, the perfect absolutely and in itself is one infinite, which cannot be greater or better, and that which nothing can be greater or better. Sorry, I just butchered the hell out of that reading. This is a weird sentence. Okay. Therefore, the perfect absolutely and in itself is one infinite, which cannot be greater or better, and that which nothing can be greater or better. I still said that really weird. Anyway, this is one everywhere, the only God, universal nature, of which nothing can be a perfect image or reflection, but the infinite. Honestly, like I've said this before on streams, like when I read things out loud, my reading comprehension like suffers immensely. So for me, like this is just like a little bit of word salad. So it would have been cool if you read this quote out yourself, especially because the amount of time it is on the screen is a little bit short, so you're kind of inviting people to either rewind or need to stop, which I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I don't know like too much about like YouTube metrics, but pretty much like the first 30 seconds are amongst the most important to grab people's attentions. So having just text can be a bit of a gamble. So yeah. So if you do have text, I would recommend like being like super clear or super concise. So I think like one example which stands to mind, maybe they voiced it, maybe they didn't. Like Redgrave and Vadi on their like Bloodborne lore synopsis used like a quote from Lovecraft. So that was pretty direct and I think fairly easy to digest. Whereas like this you actually like need to think about. Like this is like philosophy paper level. So yeah, I think it's pretty much just saying that like, you know, God is perfection and God is everywhere because like omnipotent, not omnipotent, omnipresent and whatnot. Perfection. Either way. Okay. Elden says, not worried about metrics, but what I'm saying makes sense. It's a good idea to grab people's attention in the first 30 seconds. Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm not the best at that myself. Like, my last video was the first one where I made, like, a little bit of a montage to try to drum up attention, or at least, like, set the mood a bit. And, like, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this. I'm just trying to give you, like, some, you know, insider tips here. Hey, Mortis, welcome back to stream, man.
What is a god in Elden Ring? There is Marika the Eternal, queen of the lands between, once chosen by her 2 fingers to be host for the Elden Ring. There are the outer gods, such as the formless mother and the goddess of rot that exist outside of the current order, bestowing power upon their followers and chosen demigods. There is the greater will itself, who could be said to be the main.
So, this is weird. Oh, whoops, damn it. Sorry, I meant to... Why did I put it at 480? Okay. I was like, this looks really blurry, and I was kind of confused. I was like, man, did he just have like difficulties recording? Okay, this should be better, I hope.
There are the outer gods.
Yeah, that looks a lot better.
And the
at least for me, I know you guys are like stuck at 720p.
Order, bestowing power upon their followers and chosen demigods. There is the greater will itself, who could be said to be the main god of the world in a fashion, as the 2 fingers serve as emissaries. While its Elden Beast seems to rule as vassal in the form of the Elden Ring, order incarnate that affects the metaphysical laws of the world. But could there be another god, existing not apart from the world and its inhabitants, who transcended, unknowable, and within all things? I'm the Elden Enthusiast, and I'm here to answer that question.
Alright, so I do like that you're pretty clear here with like what the aim and setup, like goal of the video essay is so far. That's pretty good. I don't always do that. Actually, maybe I kind of do. Maybe I'm lying. Yeah, that's kind of like one thing that I've always like struggled with. Like even when like going through school, I always felt like the need or push for having things like thesis statements were just like very draining. I don't know. Like they just kind of like took a lot of the wind out of my sails. Like trying to condense like the points of a paper into like one succinct sentence. It just didn't make much sense to me because like the way that I write personally is more of like a flow state writer, and I get to where I get to. But obviously with like my YouTube stuff, I do tailor it and try to make it as focused as possible. But I'm still at heart like a flow state writer, so I kind of just go back and revise the so-called thesis statements at the beginning. And so, yeah. I'm just kind of like in my own little world right now with that. You state your thesis. This doesn't happen as much in lore videos. I don't know. So the way that the thesis statement idea like finally clicked for me was when I took philosophy, something like one of the philosophy classes, and that class is oddly like way better than pretty much all of my English classes in terms of like communicating ideas and like the point of the paper that one was working on. And in some ways, it's a lot easier to come up with a thesis statement and something like that for a paper on philosophy, because you're like implicitly taking up a position against whatever straw man you're essentially coming up with for your writing. Whereas like English stuff tends to be more analytical, and analysis doesn't necessarily have to have like a driving force behind it. So yeah, that's kind of what the point that I wanted to make a moment ago, but I was just kind of like struggling to get on course there. Okay.
Much of this video will be focused on examining real-world religions, philosophies, and esoteric practices in relation to Elden Ring. There will be a lot of speculation that does not rely exclusively upon what is expressed in-game. Spoiler warning if you haven't finished the game yet. First, let's look to the Flame of
Alright, as always, I appreciate like the whole speculation warning, but with that being said, I do tend to still hold people pretty accountable for like when they aren't very clear like what is like fact within the game or the game's text versus like when they're speculating. And obviously Elden Enthusiast has been very familiar with my work for a while, so I'm not too worried yet. So let's see where this goes.
Frenzy for answers, as Hayeda's dialogue is some of the most important in the entire game for unraveling the game's metaphysics and nature of being.
All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
So just like the editing note, I definitely appreciate your use of audio. I think you probably manually slowed down the violin song and maybe added a bit of echo to it. I'm not entirely sure with that. But having that in the back going with the visuals, I think was a pretty good job. I don't know if this is necessarily like a good thing or a bad thing, or if it's just like a stylistic thing, but it might be worth considering like adding the quote text onto the screen, so that way people can just like follow along, I guess, if it does come from the game. But I mean, that isn't like really that big of a deal. That's just kind of like, I don't know. Anyway. Pretty good job so far.
This view expressed by Hayeda and those afflicted by frenzy, that the creation of the world was a mistake, and that to exist is to suffer, is crucial to understanding Elden Ring's lore, because the philosophy of the Flame of Frenzy is the most explicit Gnostic sentiment in the entire game. The idea that all was one, and that the creation of the material realm was a mistake by a demiurge or godlike figure, such as the God of the Old Testament, and that life in it is a prison that is to be escaped, shares many similarities with Hayeda's telling of the greater will's fracturing of the one great to the tarnished. For a quick overview of Gnosticism, the term itself encompasses various systems and beliefs that came about in the first centuries AD. It presupposes a secret, spiritual knowledge one can use to obtain salvation. Although early Gnosticism has many overlaps with Christianity, a key difference is that the salvation Gnostics seek is not found through a Messiah or God, but through knowledge, or gnosis. Gnostic myths are varied, but have a consistent message. The human mind and soul belong to a realm of divine light, but became tainted by coming into contact with the material
I like your little censorship there.
realm, losing knowledge of their origins. The knowledge of gnosis, then, is the realization of these truths. It should be noted that the adherents of the Flame of Frenzy represent an extreme view, as many Gnostics do not view the demiurge as completely evil, or even consider the God of the Old Testament to be the demiurge.
Sorry, I don't mean to like stop it in the midst of your sentence there, but for people who aren't like super familiar with editing, and with this being his first video, I will say that I am kind of impressed that you also did like the pseudo motion tracking to keep your censorship bar as you were panning through the painting here.
The material realm, losing knowledge of their origins. The knowledge of gnosis, then,
Or wait, was it just the camera? It wasn't necessarily motion tracking. Let me double check.
realm, losing knowledge.
Oh yeah, it
of their
might just be the
origins.
zoom. Okay.
The knowledge of Gnosis, then, is the realization of these truths. It should be noted that the adherents of the Flame of Frenzy represent an extreme view, as many Gnostics do not view the Demiurge as completely evil, or even consider the God of the Old Testament to be the Demiurge, though for reasons I will eventually elaborate on, I believe parallels can be made between the greater will and God in the Bible. Another key influence related to, but distinct from Gnosticism, is Hermeticism, consisting of extensive literature attributed to the famed figure Hermes Trismegistus, who was syncretized from the deities the Greek Hermes and Egyptian Thoth, consisting of religious, astrological, alchemical, and magical treatises written in the 1st centuries AD, such as the Picatrix. Like Trismegistus, Hermeticism was syncretized from various beliefs, such as Platonism and Stoicism.
Was that Jonah Hill?
Hermeticism was syncretized from various beliefs, such as
I don't know.
Platonism and Stoicism.
Is Plato? Okay.
Hermeticism posits that
Jonah Hill as Plato? I don't know if you guys have seen a picture of Jonah Hill recently, but like I saw him like surfing or something, and he like legitimately looked like that dude for a second. Jonah Hill surfer beard? How do I make this larger? One second. Okay, yeah, this will be great. I'm gonna back up 5 seconds. Sorry for like totally killing your thoughts here. Okay. Damn it.
Like Trismegistus, Hermeticism was syncretized from various beliefs, such as
Okay. Now. Wait, where is it? There we go. You seriously telling me? I think you're lying to me. I mean, people do be looking similar, but yeah, okay. Anyway. All of the Gnostic stuff is giving you Liza P flashbacks. Jack Nicholson is Caligula. Oh man. Welcome in, you all. Or however you pronounce that. And Tony Sackatite Knight. Interesting name there. What's he smelling? What the cave is cooking. Sorry, that was a terrible... I can't even call it a pun. That was just a terrible joke. Alright, backing it up so that way he could
magical
make his
treatises
point.
written in the 1st centuries AD, such as the Picatrix. Like Trismegistus, Hermeticism was syncretized from various beliefs, such as Platonism and Stoicism. Hermeticism posits that God is knowable in some form within man, in the form of the nous, meaning reason and knowledge, and that the world is not inherently evil in stark contrast to Gnosticism. Fellow YouTuber, the Chad Goldmask, and his video on the Frenzied Flame is an excellent overview of the Gnostic influence in Elden Ring. I highly recommend watching it when you can. The Corpus Hermeticum is a collection of writings attributed to Trismegistus. It contains the Lament of Asclepius, a Hermetic prophecy lamenting the destruction of Egypt. It prophesizes the lands being abandoned by the gods and the arrival of foreign invaders. It ends with the destruction of the world through God by fire. I quote, "Then God, the creator of all things, will look on that which has come to pass, and will stop the disorder by the counterforce of his will, which is the good. He will call back to the right path those who have gone astray. He will cleanse the world of evil, washing it away with floods, burning it out with the fiercest fire, and expelling it with war and pestilence."
And I think that's a really good quote to throw in here with your overall thesis so far, because it evokes the whole mental imagery of the greater will, and tying that potentially to fire and or the one great might work to build up some points that you might be working towards here in a moment. Hey Bella, welcome back to stream. It's going well, you?
End quote. I believe several parallels can be made to Elden Ring, with previous civilizations perhaps having been like Egypt, Placidusax's god abandoning him, and the frenzied flame ending successfully cleansing the world with its fire that is fiercer than any. It seems to be a direct reference, since it mourns an age long past, and is the only song in the game with actual lyrics, which is extremely noteworthy on its own.
And these little dudes probably don't get talked about enough, but they are like one of the most enigmatic factions, if you want to call them that, in the game, just because like they're not exactly beasts, they're not men, they're not demi-humans, they're just this kind of in-between of everything. And actually, let me check my Elden Ring notes. Where are we at? So beast lure pots do not work on the little bats nor the granny bats, but wait. I probably should have been more explicit in my notes. So yeah, it seems like White Shadow's lure, shadow bait, and the beast lure pot, and all of that does not work on these bat people. So they're kind of technically not beasts or like even demi-humans, because like demi-humans are baited by all of these. So yeah, that just it's just very puzzling, I suppose. Let me go back to the video. Okay. They're female? Okay. And also like the bat wings, like they almost have like peacock style designs on the inside. They're just very interesting to me, and there's like nothing. And like the pygmy dudes, at least they have like a little bit of armor, but there's really nothing on that. Like the closest thing that you might compare these things to potentially at all, and this is a huge stretch, would be the winged scythe, where they talk about like angels having white wings, because like these things kind of have white wings, but they're not exactly angels in like the standard modern definition, I guess. I don't know. So yeah,
in the game with actual lyrics, which is extremely noteworthy on its own. In the 4th book of the Picatrix, Hermes Trismegistus is said to have founded a marvelous city in Egypt. This city is the mythical Greco-Egyptian Adecentin, where Trismegistus is said to have built a temple to the sun, where he planted a great tree which bore the fruit of all generation. The description for the Sun Realm shield states, "Shield of honor depicting a city crowned by the sun. It has seen better days." Much like the wear upon the shield, the seed.
Sorry, and yeah, I guess I don't think I've gone through and tried to compare anything in the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree trailer to the Sunrealm shield specifically, although like some of the towers that we've seen already kind of come to mind when looking at this image. Anyway,
Seed of the sun is long faded away. Many lore enthusiasts like myself believe Farum Azula to have been the seed of the sun, as the shield drops from some of the enemies there. The sun also shines eternally, though that could be due to Farum's unique time distortions. Adecentin also had talismans embedded all along the walls to protect the city. All of the Drake talismans state, the ancient dragons, who ruled in the prehistoric era before the Erdtree, would protect their lord as a wall of living rock, and so it is that the shape of the dragon has become symbolic of all manner of protections. In the Lament, some scholars view Adecentin representing the ideal society that is destroyed, and I believe Farum Azula's Elden Ring's Adecentin as the seed of the sun, with its dragons embedded in its walls similar to talismans to protect their lord Placidusax.
So I do like the way that you framed that language there, and that this is what you believe. So even if somebody like disagrees, it's very clear that you're not trying to say like this as like a matter of fact. So it's just very clear there. So kudos there. So yeah, even if I'm not necessarily on board with it, I could at least very fairly like follow along and entertain your position here. So good job there. I eat at Mondo Burger.
In Elden Ring, sorceries and incantations are two sides of the same coin. Sorceries draw upon the power of the stars, glintstone. The description for Elden Stars states, this legendary incantation is the most ancient of those that derive from the Erdtree, creates a stream of golden shooting stars that assail the area. It is said that long ago, the greater will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. Faith, instead, is required for channeling power derived from golden amber. Thus, incantations seem to draw upon the power of the golden star that is the Elden Ring. In contrast, Arcane seems to draw upon something else entirely. The description for the regalia of Eocade states, "Treasured sword of Eocade, a lesser, long-vanished domain." The copper coloration is not to be confused for rust, but is a conduit for its wielder to move it by their will alone. Also tied to Arcane, the Albanargs are artificial beings, despised by the inhabitants of the lands between for being born outside of the Erdtree's grace. They are special due to their methods of casting magic. The description for the Albanarg staff states, "The Albanargs harbor a secret. They cast sorcery with their innate arcaneness. What is innate about them? Their silvery blood. Like the Eocade sword, their metallic blood is a conduit that can be used to cast sorceries, despite being artificial beings." The description for the Ripple Blade states, "Unique weapon wielded by young Albanargs. This sword is modeled after the ripples that are thought to be the origin of their species." Also related to Arcane, the powers obtained from consuming dragon hearts seem tied to inner strength, since those draconic powers do not rely exclusively upon faith, like the incantations of the ancient dragon cult. What is the common tie between these arcane abilities? It seems to be the power within, specifically, the blood that all living beings share in common. First,
yeah, blood has kind of been a really big theme for like FromSoft games, and being able to channel one's like kind of inner essence, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure if Arcane is completely limited to blood, and I know Elden Enthusiast isn't like making that claim necessarily here, but there is still a broad component of Arcane that we might not understand yet. So maybe the DLC will add more. It is said that the Albanargs were created. Yeah.
I'll need to go on a tangent to explain why blood is tied to Arcane. Elden Ring has heavy alchemical symbolism, with examples such as a line purifying the sun, similar to Sorosh and Godfrey. Unalloyed, or pure gold. Marika as a vessel for the vision, similar to a hermetic vessel, which would be the equivalent of a great alchemical work, the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. There is also the flask of wondrous physic, described as a relic of the physic chemists, priests of the Erdtree, used to mix together different mixtures of crystal tears together, a clear example of an alchemical concoction. The most prominent example of alchemical imagery is Marika and Radagon, who represent the famous rebus of alchemy, the union of the Red King and White Queen, a perfect integration of male and female energies. Although the pursuit of alchemy in medieval Europe was mainly concerned with the transmuting of metals and the creation of gold, there was a spiritual component as well that arose in the 16th century, beginning with the alchemist Paracelsus, and later continued by others.
I always forget about that dude and his haircut.
Thus, this new spiritual alchemy, tinged with Christian influence, dealt with the reconciliation of matter, resulting in a perfect union, the goal of the wise, the Philosopher's Stone. The description for the gilded greatshield states, metal greatshield coated with gold.
Oh no, am I about to get triggered by this description again?
Carried by knights loyal to Godric, the red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, the color of homeward yearning. I believe the red color of the gilded greatshield described as one of yearning can be applied to Radagon, who founded Golden Order fundamentalism, as his law of regression states. The fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. It seems then that Radagon and the Flame of Frenzy are both aware of the desire to converge, though the Flame of Frenzy's goals are not geared towards seeking gnosis or knowledge to ascend to oneness, as it is more preoccupied with ending suffering instead, forcibly burning everything and everyone, a false convergence.
Alright, so apologize to chat. I'm going to back up and rewatch this section just so I could absorb it a bit better with like the Gilded Great Shield specifically. Okay.
Mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, the color of homeward yearning. I believe the red color of the gilded great shield described as one of yearning can be applied to Radagon, who founded Golden Order fundamentalism, as his law of regression states. The fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. It seems then that Radagon and the Flame of Frenzy are both aware of the desire to converge.
All right, so while I don't disagree with you that I think Radagon founded the Golden Order fundamentalism and whatnot, I think what you did there was technically a bit of a non sequitur with your usage of as.
Who founded Golden Order fundamentalism as his law of regression states.
As his law of regression states. Okay, I see what you did there. Okay, so maybe I should like take that back then. Yeah, I guess this is fine. Never mind.
States. The fundamentalists describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. It seems then that Radagon and the Flame of Frenzy are both aware of the desire to converge, though the Flame of Frenzy's goals are not geared towards seeking gnosis or knowledge to ascend to oneness, as it is more preoccupied with ending suffering instead, forcibly burning everything and everyone, a false convergence. Radagon's journey of Golden Order
So one question I have for not just like Elden Enthusiast specifically, but just people who believe that about like Radagon's law of regression specifically, then why do you think like we haven't fully converged through Golden Order fundamentalism? And you don't necessarily like have to answer that with like this video or anything, but that's just kind of one question that springs to mind as a result of the comparison between the law of regression and the Flame of Frenzy specifically there.
fundamentalism, on the other hand, is one where he sought knowledge to become complete. The description for the Radagon icon states, as the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete.
And maybe this is part of your goal to like plant the seed in the brain to help the idea grow. But yeah, thinking about regression in the context of knowledge specifically is kind of interesting, even like apart from the whole like Gnostic lens here, in that maybe the so-called conditions for regression could be met or be fulfilled through understanding and knowledge, in that as far as Elden Ring is concerned, I think like to know something, to understand something, is to be able to like potentially reproduce it, or I don't necessarily want to say like become one with it, but it is kind of true to an extent, isn't it? I'm trying to like think of a way to articulate this thought. Hopefully you guys are like getting what I'm saying here. You thought about leaving this specific part out. You have a good answer, but it's 3 hours long. I feel that. No. I don't think you need to take it out necessarily. I think it's just like the framing of it. Like what you did is not wrong. It was my fault. Like I had the misunderstanding. And of course you could always like make the argument like, oh, it's a skill issue. I should have revised so that misunderstanding shouldn't come up. But I think that's a little bit of a fool's errand to strive to that level of perfection, just because like no matter how clear you make something, somebody's like thoughts can wander in the middle of your sentence, and they could pick something up that you didn't necessarily intend, or they might just interpret a word a different way than you meant, which is perfectly natural. It's not always necessarily lost in translation, because that happens very frequently, even like people's native tongues and whatnot. So yeah, no. I don't think that section needed to be taken out. These are just like the thoughts that I'm sharing with you. Like this isn't so much a critique right here as much as it is like the reaction part of like my stream, you know? So Philanthropist says, it says he aspired to be complete, yet he didn't delve in the arcane arts. Maybe the arcane came after Radagon's time. I would disagree with that, because you have a lot of like the dragon communion stuff and dragons predating the Golden Order at the very least. and arguably the Albinorics as well. But that is a good question, I think, to be gleaned from your kind of a question here, in that maybe the Arcane should be a component that should have been included in the Golden Order, or Golden Order fundamentalism more specifically there. You're trying to plant that idea, but I'll see when I watch a bit more. Yeah, that's kind of what I figure. So that's like one of the very like satisfying things for me as like a content creator, is like when I don't necessarily say something explicitly, but I just kind of hint at it, and then people make the connections on their own, and pretty much comment the point that I was trying to make on my videos. That always feels like a dub, even if it is slightly annoying when someone like points out what you like thought was pretty clear about the video. I think it's like a little bit of a blessing and a curse. Levo created the video about the law of regression a week ago. You believe the law of regression just does not work anymore, or didn't work at all, as the Golden Order is broken to its core. You know what? That's a very fair reading, I think. It might not necessarily be one that I entirely agree with, or that others would entirely agree with, but I definitely think there is some validity behind the logic there. If it's working, omen should not exist. Regression is regression to the mean. Regression is regression to mean no change allowed. So that much I don't know about, and I think that could just be impressing a meaning upon the idea of regression that might not be completely native to the game, if that makes sense. And that's just like kind of one of the unanswered questions of like the game. And so like my thoughts on regression are not final by any means, but I felt like for my last video, when I stumbled upon the idea of immutability being contained within regression, I felt like that might have been like one way to reconcile that whole idea of like Groundhog Day, of like why you can die and be brought back, which kind of doesn't work in some ways because it's the guidance of grace which brings you back, which in my own argument should like predate Golden Order fundamentalism and whatnot. But yeah, it's just kind of gameplay, lore concessions to gameplay mechanics, perhaps. Hey, Jay Dixon, welcome back. Nice to see you again. Glad you're back? Question mark? Are you? You hate when people have to point out something super obvious, like "Thank you, Ted. That was the joke." I mean, I don't know. Like, I have mixed feelings about that. When I was younger, I was a lot more of a prick about it because, I don't know, I was just a lot more uptight about stuff like that. But as I've gotten older and like learned more about the world, because like when I was a kid, like autism diagnoses weren't exactly a thing, like Asperger's, which is kind of now like bundled into autism spectrum and whatnot. Like those kind of concepts weren't really known or like widely shared at the time. Whereas like now, growing older, like learning that there are some people who literally don't understand sarcasm or jokes or things that are not like spelled out plain as day has given me a lot more patience and understanding and trying to deal with people who don't necessarily pick things up as naturally as other people. And then also with the internet, not everybody speaks like English to a native level. So if like people are second learners of the language, I think it's also very important to try to like accommodate that, because yeah, when I was a kid, I was way more of a prescriptivist about the use of language and whatnot. But I've chilled out a hell of a lot more as I've gotten older, because I am not just dealing with like people in my immediate vicinity anymore. And Scaleezy says Arcane is pretty much a catch-all for anything not mainstream. Definitely true, more so for the Dark Souls games, but there might be more of an agenda in Elden Ring. Hopefully, maybe, probably not though. We'll see. And Northern Tommy says, a lot of mistakes come from people not fully understanding the context and meaning of big words. I wouldn't even necessarily limit it to big words, because sometimes like even common words could mean slightly different things to different people depending on like how they grew up assimilating them. Because like most people don't necessarily learn a language from a dictionary. They learn it just through like their everyday life. And a lot of things can be regional or like can be lost in context. Like just think about how many people mispronounce words because they've only ever read them in books, you know? So I think like a similar principle can happen where like somebody uses a word wrong, but it just kind of, or uses a word incorrectly if we want to be pedantic about it. And somebody else is hearing that word in a certain context for the first time, and they assume that the person who made the mistake said it confidently and correctly. And so they kind of infer the wrong meaning of a word. Like that, it just happens. It's just kind of part of life there. Yeah, and Mortis says that he's one of them. He does not get sarcasm. And I appreciate you being very upfront about that because it makes it easier to try to accommodate you as well. Northern Tommy was in middle school by the time the diagnoses were actually taken seriously. For so long, and even some today, it's been met with dismissive attitudes. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now that we're done with that tangent, let's go back to the video. Oh, and what we're talking about. I'm going to back it up just a bit to get my thoughts back in order. Yeah, this is some pretty dense stuff. It's pretty good so far, though.
The red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. The Hermetic tradition held that Adam was hermaphroditic before the fall, and the necessity of the chemical wedding was based on the idea that, after the fall, man lost his original, undivided Adamic state and had to reconcile and unite the conflicting halves. The name Adam is thought to have been derived from Adam, or Red Earth. Perhaps Radagon is the Red Adam who yearns to be whole again, and the fall of man from a state of oneness could instead be the split from the one great caused by the greater will. Thus,
and I thought about this as you kind of initially brought up alchemy, but I didn't want to get us off track and off topic because it isn't necessarily like directly related to your video specifically as much as it is like other people who've like also made alchemical related videos as well. But I'm curious how never mind. Well, I'm not gonna like never mind. I'm just like trying to think of how to articulate it. So I was originally going to say that I wonder how some people would reconcile Radagon being Marika to begin with the whole aspect of needing to combine the two to make them whole or like greater than whole or you know, like the Philosopher's Stone type gold situation. But then I remembered not everybody believes that Radagon was intrinsically part of Marika originally. So I guess that could be how they could reconcile that idea. So I guess my question might not be the best question unless some alchemy truthers do believe that Radagon and Marika were one. And if they were one, then going back to my question, why would splitting and then recreating like be the play instead of just remaining whole to begin with? And of course, like this could come into like where Elden Ring sets itself apart from alchemy with like the whole like a system of the Elden Ring and requiring an Elden Lord particularly. Okay. Didn't even mention how Cain was the first vampire. Shake your head. Translation issues are very complicated in FromSoft games. You cannot just transfer from Japanese to English without losing meaning, but that doesn't necessarily mean that English is incorrect. I think like it's a case-by-case basis. And as a very famous like Japanese saying goes, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So because I am like the hammer, like pointing out all the nails that stick out, a lot of people think like there's a lot of issues with the translations of the games rather, which is kind of a half truth because like certain things do stick out, but I mean, by and large, like the translations are fine, and a lot of these differences just tend to be like more nuance, and that's just stuff happens. Like the issue is like the type of language, maybe not like the type of language, but just like the information density contained within the lore of Elden Ring is so high that the significance of each word is way higher than like most media out there. So like very subtle differences can have profound impacts for the overall scope of the lore. And as I mentioned quite in depth yesterday with like my Gilded Great Shield and Ordovis's Great Sword, like descriptions there, like understanding primordial matter as something that doesn't necessarily mean like a literal primordial soup, that's kind of like a huge change, but isn't like completely wrong from like what the Japanese does say. And so like, yeah, it's just a real pain. Hey, Two Hit, I don't remember seeing you in chat tonight, but welcome on in. It's very convenient that America's alt is who wound up marrying Renala. You could see being a breakpoint of splitting. So yeah, I guess to answer my own question, which I posed a moment ago, one could make the argument that America split herself off specifically to have a way to get to Renala's sorcery, and then at that point she could combine to be like whole again. I think that's a completely fair reading for like the alchemist truthers, to be fair. And then Elden Enthusiast says, let's just say that for now, that being complete might mean more than just as a person. You don't go into it in detail, but once you get far into the video, I'll have an idea. Okay, thank you. Okay, gonna go back to the video now.
Golden Order fundamentalism could be a journey similar to Gnosis, where one attains the knowledge to ascend to rejoin the One. I believe From Software and George R.R. Martin chose alchemy as the perfect visual motif to display these religious and philosophical ideas. However, the nature of Radagon's quest for perfection is very vague to say the very least. Just wanted to point out a possible parallel though. Some of the Greater Will's actions seem to mirror gods in the Old Testament, which I believe was deliberate to show that the Greater Will is a demiurge-like figure described by some Gnostics. The banishment of the Nox by the Greater Will, I argue, parallels the plague of darkness that afflicted the Egyptians described in the Book of Wisdom. For great are your judgments, and hard to describe. Therefore the unruly souls went astray. For when the lawless thought to enslave the holy nation, they themselves lay shackled with darkness, fettered by the long night, confined beneath their own roofs as exiles from the eternal providence.
Oh yeah, I meant to say this earlier, but kind of got distracted. I do appreciate you putting like your sources here as like kind of pseudo footnotes there.
For they, who supposed their secret sins were hid under the dark veil of oblivion, were scattered in fearful trembling, terrified by apparitions. For not even their inner chambers kept them unafraid, for crashing sounds on all sides terrified them, and mute phantoms with somber looks appeared. No fire had force enough to give light, nor did the flaming brilliance of the stars succeed in lighting up that gloomy night. The Book of Wisdom, Chapter 17. The description for the magma worm scale sword states, curved greatsword wielded by magma worms. The shape resembles a dragon's jaw and is covered in hard scales. It's said these land-bound dragons were once human heroes who partook in dragon communion, a grave transgression for which they were cursed to crawl the earth upon their bellies, shadows of their former selves. This punishment described seems to be a clear allusion to the serpent's punishment in Genesis for tricking Eve into eating the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God then asked the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman answered, "The snake tricked me, so I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the snake, "Because you have done this, cursed are you among all the animals, tame or wild. On your belly you shall crawl, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." The Book of Genesis, Chapter 3, verse 13 and 14. I wonder then if dragon communion is a transgression, not only for attempting to transform into the image of the divine ancient dragons that could have perhaps been made in the Greater Will's image, but for also partaking of a forbidden fruit of knowledge and consuming dragon hearts, the knowledge of inner power, the true nature of divinity.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack with dragon communion and consuming the dragon hearts to gain power. And I've really been surprised so far that like a lot of other content creators haven't like gone into it too much in depth that I've seen, although this could be like a me issue more than anything, and that You're talking about those who consume dragon hearts. Oh wait, is this a Japanese only thing? No, I think it's there. No, it's definitely there in English. Yeah, I thought it was like cut content for a while, but then I eventually found it. Where is my spreadsheet? Awareness. All right, here we go. All right. That heart you brought back, it's used in Dragon Communion. If you should find yourself overcome by hunger for their heart, yearning for its strength, and okay, blah, blah, blah. Those who partake in Dragon Communion will one day shed their humanity. Their hunger for dragon, their yearning only worsens. Until the floodgates burst, unleashing eternal torment. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Now I remember the issue. Maybe it's not like really that big of an issue. Trying to think of like how to piece things together, because I'm running into the issue right now where like I don't remember enough of like what is different between the English and the Japanese of Dark Souls. But okay, I'm gonna do something a little bit different for the stream. I tend to try not to do this so much, but I honestly don't remember enough of the particulars right now. What video is this in? Wasn't the Abyss. I actually need to look at my own channel's videos real quick. So one of the issues is that like I think yearning and desire and whatnot is a huge theme in Dark Souls, and while it is still there to an extent in English, especially with Nashandra and the Throne of Want and whatnot, it is a little bit more disjointed because of the terminology that's used, which isn't to say that like it's all like one word in Japanese, but it seemed a little bit more cohesive to me in the Japanese text. So life following the undead curse, or was it the first sin? Shackle of the gods. Maybe no, it would have been pyromancy. Okay. I think. Welcome to another episode. So okay, here we go. The connection is made. Or maybe not. I thought I talked about it here. I know I did it with. I guess it's good enough. But I thought I had a section where I like showed all of the quotes essentially. It might be later on in this video. Damn it. Maybe not this video after all. My mistake. Sorry, I'm trying to be a little bit selfish here. What's the other one called? Maybe it was the Shackle of the Gods. I don't remember what I titled it. Okay. Welcome to... So it's probably not this video then. I will check one more video real quick. Otherwise, I'll just move on because this is kind of ridiculous that I don't even remember my own point. Would it really have been that one? Well, thought I saw him. Yeah, this is just, the video's too long. No, it's too far here, I think. Alright, yeah, I might just move on here if I'm not seeing Laurentius anytime soon. Damn it. Wouldn't be this section. Yeah, I didn't think it was this video. All right, I'll just move on. So let me look at chat real quick, and I need to remember yearning. The word shackle is interesting also. Yeah. That he talks about. Yeah, okay. The vertebra shackle. So yeah, in my opinion, the idea of shackles in Dark Souls is that life itself is the shackle that they come to believe in, and that is a lot clearer in my video when I talk about like Aldia and Vendrick and like the Hollow Lord or the Dark Lord, something like that. How well I remember my own videos. It was actually one of my more recent videos, like my most recent Dark Souls one, I think. Why use shackles instead of chains per se? It's more like shackle. I can't necessarily say shackle in the sense of prison, but yeah, the ties that bind, you know. Must be hard to keep talking points straight and have the idea flow in a coherent way. So props. Yeah, I definitely struggle with that at times, and also trying to like articulate them well is also a challenge for me. Life is a curse? Yeah, I definitely would say so. And that's kind of confirmed in some ways with like Shadowlot saying that the soul and the curse are one and the same. And with like souls essentially being life in Dark Souls by the transitive property A equals B equals C. So life is a curse by virtue of souls. Okay, so where was I going with the whole yearning thing? Let me back up your video real quick to try to like jog my memory. Because yearning is really important.
That could have perhaps been made in the greater will's image, but for also partake.
All right. So I think the point that I wanted to go to is like, why is Dragon Communion ruinous as opposed to other things? Like rather than like gaining knowledge. And it seems like the direct consumption is kind of blasphemous, perhaps, maybe? I don't know. And so, are what Radagon and Marika doing like better? I don't really know. Like, I don't know what kind of question that I'm trying to ask with this. It's just very fascinating to me that consuming dragon hearts specifically is you know, kind of regarded as bad, at least to humans who like value their humanity at least. But killing other beings and funneling them into a tree is better? Question mark, I guess. So that's kind of like where I'm at with that idea right now. Hey Stella, nice to see you again. Okay, so going back to the whole like yearning thing, the point that I wanted to make is by consuming the dragon hearts, their yearning increases and their yearning becomes unquenchable. And there's a really goofy ghost in Caelid where he says, "I'm dry as a bone." Maybe, yeah. I'm dry as a bone. Fool dragon, surrender your strength. Let me feast on your heart. So, I'm honestly shocked that this happened this way. They might have just literally translated one line at a time and just like, anyway. So the kanji here, kawaku, in this form means to be thirsty, but it does also mean dry. And context makes it clearer whether somebody is like thirsty or whether or not they're dry. And so like Japanese people will say like nodo ga kawai, so like their throat is dry to mean that they're thirsty. So maybe because of the ku there. Thirst, dry up, parch. I'm surprised that dry up was kind of like not super high up there. But anyway, yeah, so yearning as it pertains to Radagon, I think is an interesting thing to consider, and not something that I'm not entirely comfortable with associating Radagon with yearning specifically, which isn't to say that it can't be a thing, but I'm just kind of curious about that because it doesn't seem to align with this other kind of yearning associated with consuming dragon hearts, which are like kind of implicitly said to be like filled with gravelstone, which are filled with gold. So in my estimation, if you eat a dragon heart, you're eating the gravelstone within it and therefore eating the gold within it. So you're essentially eating gold, and that could be why you transform. And like everything relating to dragon communion makes things more primal in nature, and like the dragon incantations are more primal in nature, which is kind of against the whole idea of like conquering the order through faith and understanding more specifically, because you kind of don't need either just by the virtue of strength alone, which is kind of what like Godfrey originally ruled with, sort of. But anyway, kind of going off on a tangent there. Hey, V-Limit, nice to see you again. And Moterian, I don't remember if I welcomed you in, but nice to have you in here. So the tree is a ghost trap? Maybe. Yeah, if you want to think of it like Ghostbusters, it's essentially, you throw it on the ground, it collects the spirits of the dead, and grows. That phantom is so rude for no reason, fool dragon. Oh, does he actually call him a fool in Japanese? Oh, not exactly. I think they tried to I think preserve the fact that they used like omae tachi, like for the most basic of weeaboos, you know that omae is kind of like a rude way for saying you. And so I think they're just trying to preserve that. So he doesn't necessarily call them like fools outright, but I think they were just trying to keep the stank on it. But with that being said, like omae isn't always necessarily rude, especially in the context of like anime and like video games. It's just very casual, I guess, might be a way of saying it. And to speak to somebody casually can be perceived as being rude. So that might be a better way of framing it there. All right. Elden says, the idea that they have is that the dragons are divine, having been the ones to rule in the previous age, and it may be a punishment by the greater will. Maybe. Okay. I'm going to go back to the video now.
Taking of a forbidden fruit of knowledge and consuming dragon hearts, the knowledge of inner power, the true nature of divinity. Now to tie together why blood and arcane are inextricably linked. They have also, by a name based only on resemblances, called this matter lac virginis, the blessed blood of rosy color, which, nevertheless, suits only the prophets and sons of God. Hence the sophists gathered that this philosophical matter was in the blood of animals or of man, the alchemist Paracelsus. In the Aurora of the Philosophers, the alchemist Paracelsus spoke on the true nature of the philosopher's stone, and the ways in which men erred in pursuit of...
All right, so just a moment ago, it's a little bit clearer that you're... Oh, okay, I see now at the bottom right. Sorry, I get... I don't always notice the stuff on the bottom right because of the subtitles, which isn't necessarily... Or the closed captions, which isn't necessarily your fault, because, I mean, I can move them all the way up here, but I just tend to default to the bottom. So, yeah, I was going to say at first, it didn't seem super clear to me that you were quoting something, and... Yeah, maybe this is maybe a little bit of both. between like my skill issue and like maybe this could have been framed slightly better. If you just did something like say like quote beforehand, that might help differentiate it from being like you speaking specifically here.
Or lac virginis, the blessed blood of rosy color, which, nevertheless, suits only the prophets and sons of God. Hence the sophists gathered that this philosophical matter was in the blood of animals or of man. The alchemist, Paracelsus. In the Aurora of the Philosophers, the alchemist Paracelsus spoke on the true nature of the philosopher's stone, and the ways in which men erred in pursuit of it. He mentions those who seek the stone in animal or blood, and references the tale Mercurius, or Morienus, the alchemist summoned King Khalid's court to explain the mysteries of the stone to him. Historically, Khalid was actually a prince, whose real name was Khalid ibn Yazid of the Umayyad dynasty, who were the ruling family of the Second Caliphate between 661 and 750, established after the death of Muhammad. Many alchemical writings were attributed to Yazid. I quote, "This matter that you have requested cannot be attained by anyone by force."
It's kind of funny that it was like only like 2 minutes later that you did it.
And cannot be gained by violence, and can only be acquired from a scientist by kindness, affection, and true love. Mercurius to Khalid. Khalid was shunted aside his birthright to the throne by his brother, Marwan I. Similarities between the names Khalid, where Mog's palace lies directly under, and King Khalid, along with the associations with fire and blood, lead me to believe Mog may have been inspired by this ancient alchemist. In their final operations, the virtue of this most excellent fiery mystery caused an obscure liquid to exude drop by drop from the matter in their vessels. Hence they predicted that, in the last times, there should come a most pure man upon the earth, by whom the redemption of the world should be brought about.
That was my fault.
And that this man should send forth bloody drops of a red color, by means of which he should redeem the world from sin. Paracelsus, from the Aurora of the Philosophers. An alchemical work called the Viridarium Chemicum shows the infant stone being fed with red blood and white virgin's milk, known also as the cleansing mercurial waters or celestial dew, and I believe Mikola is a philosophical child, an alchemical term for an infant stone produced from the union of the red king and white queen in alchemy that must be nourished to maturation due to his parents being the red Radagon and white Marika. As an Empyrean born of such a union, it is no wonder then that Mog would kidnap the young Mikola who possesses such blood. The blood-bound incantations state, "The Mother of Truth craves wounds. When Mog stood before her, deep underground, his accursed blood erupted with fire, and besotted with the defilement that he was born into."
So one thing that I wonder in relation to this video and the idea of like Gnosticism and like sophistry and all that would be that if Golden Order fundamentalism to some extent represents Gnosticism, in at least in the idealization of knowledge and whatnot, then does the Mother of Truth being affiliated with blood and therefore the arcane signify that truth is kind of separate from knowledge and or like faith? Is it just kind of like its own paradigm where it doesn't need to justify itself just by like the virtue of its being, it exists perhaps? I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
The description for Morgoth's cursed sword states, "Warped blade of shifting hue used by Morgoth, the Omen King. The accursed blood that Morgoth recanted and sealed away formed into this blade." In alchemy, the process of sublimation is purification and clarification, where the volatile spirit is extracted from an impure body, producing many colors. This process is done with rapid vaporization through applied heat. This is what the formless mother does for the Omen twins, in my opinion. And so, when she illuminated Mog with the truth in his blood through fire, he would then seek a suitable consort for his coming dynasty, and he found one in Mikola, who had attempted to create a refuge for all peoples through his halictree, watering it with his own blood. What was the truth the formless mother showed Mog? In the Aurora of the Philosophers, Paracelsus speaks of the ancient wisdom, the occult wisdom found in all things. In Elden Ring, perhaps the true nature of Arcane draws upon a sacred, inner power that is life itself in the form of magic. the formless mother, in an apparent act of love, attempted to ascend the Omen twins from their impure bodies, or at least show them the divine exists at all, even in accursed blood, by exalting them with great power.
And to be fair, I think this would be a good time to have included the definition of arcane. Whether or not you just wanted to do that in English or Japanese, you'll still get a very similar definition there of a sacred, divine, occult mystery. And I don't know if the term arcane has any specific ties to Gnosticism, because there are specific connotations that go with the term arcane for the Catholic Church I know of, where they were supposed to be the inner secrets of the church that were only shared to the most inner members of the clergy and whatnot. So arcane's ties to divine mysteries and the truth might be relevant here. And this isn't me saying oh, you should have done it this way. It's just I'm thinking of this within this context, and that seems like it could have been a natural transition to that point.
For a good portion of this next section, I must thank Hawkshaw's videos on the Ancestral followers for giving me more insight and helped me gather my thoughts. He convincingly argues that the followers are a more recent culture that has sprouted up in post-shattering times due to seemingly no mention or signs of existing and interacting with other cultures in past history, and their horns that they have yet to bud. I
feel like that's pretty contentious, because if we were to compare the Ancestral followers to some other nomadic cultures in the world, Native Americans and stuff like that, because they're nomadic and they eschew metalwork and quote unquote civilization, or I think they just call them letters. Yeah, I think they might just call them letters. Damn it, I need to look it up. No, it's not too important. Anyway, because they kind of eschew culture, or civilization might be the better word for it, it would kind of make sense that if they left tracks, they would be more biodegradable, and therefore wouldn't necessarily be long-lasting proofs of their history. But nonetheless, I do think it is fair to question when the people themselves came to be on the timeline here. Could have made it clear that there could be contention there. Oh no, that's fine. I mean, you said that Hawkshaw helped inform your thoughts about that here, and so I'm not necessarily trying to attack your position here. I mean, kind of I am, but not exactly. You framed it perfectly fine. I'm just doing this to show I don't necessarily agree with that myself yet. So you might say something to change my mind in a moment here, but this is just where I am for now. Yeah.
I agree with this view that the followers practice a pluralistic religion around them, and that one God is not the main focus of their faith in comparison to the Erdtree society. I highly recommend watching both of his videos on the subject for a great analysis of the Ancestral followers and their ways. The followers live beyond the Erdtree's purview, rejecting metals and the written word for a simpler lifestyle, very much in touch with nature itself. Everything they need is gathered from nature, from the pelts they wear to the weapons they craft out of horns and jawbone, to name a few. The ancestor spirits are worshipped by the followers, nurtured in the hopes that worthy sprouts will bud. They do not worship just one spirit, as they drive competition with the growth of others, as seen in the Hallowhorn grounds, despite there already being a regal ancestor spirit that is sovereign. The life and death cycle is fully embraced by the Ancestral followers. The most vivid example of this cycle is in the fight with the regal ancestor spirit.
And if I were to make an argument against the Ancestral followers being something of a more recent phenomenon, I would say the fact that they do worship a life and death cycle might, or at least it could be taken as evidence that they may have originally come from a time when life and death were still naturally part of the cycle. And the fact that they deliberately stay away from the Erdtree, I think, should show that they're aware of how it was originally supposed to function, and deliberately chose to stay away from it when it functioned properly, because now it's allegedly broken and all that. So with destined death being removed, things shouldn't be dying, and if things shouldn't be dying, why are these folks adhering to these practices in which like death was part of the cycle, I guess? And you could make the argument that it's a bit of a reactionary movement by them to try to return to a previous time. I think that's, valid to an extent, but it just doesn't pass the vibe check for me personally.
In the first phase of the battle, it moves around with great vigor while having a skeletal appearance. Fungi grows all over its body, life from death. There are moments when it seemingly dies, only to emerge from various animals, taking on characteristics of the animal spirit it emerged from, charging like a boar, or springing about like a hare, even siphoning away life from surrounding spirits to vivify itself at lower health. Spirit is also key to their powers, as the dwelling arrows state. Arrow in which the spirits of small animals are thought to dwell deals magic damage. Using the spirits of animals imbued in their arrows, the followers can shoot them with supernatural accuracy as they home in on their prey. The followers also draw these spiritual energies within themselves, more apparent in the shamans than the warriors. Both the spiritual magic and the glintstone sorcery sorcerers use are blue, and both require intelligence, such as the infant head. A key difference, aside from glintstone being a deeper color, and found hardened.
Yeah, that might be something I want to re-examine a little bit more, that the Ancestral infant head scales on intelligence rather than arcane, which might seem to be a bit more, what's the word? I don't want to say self-evident, but something along that line. Like, you might expect it to scale with arcane instead of like intelligence or faith, because I don't know. The Ancestral followers are really weird, and it does bother me a lot that there's just some random blue boys down underneath in Shifra. Just because, like, why are they there? How are they dead? Why is, like, the way that they're dead, like, different from the other forms of death? It's just so annoying that we have, like, virtually nothing to distinguish that form of death from other forms of death, I guess.
In the lands between, in contrast to the gentler blue of the nature magic, is how they are wielded in the first place. Full credit to Hawkshaw for this observation. The sorcerers of the Academy utilize their intellect to not only understand, but manipulate the world around them. The followers' magic, in contrast, seems to take a more balanced approach by not only using the intelligent mind, but seemingly relying on instinct in a sense, by being in tune with nature itself, not to change the world according to the wishes of its wielder. Selin tells the Tarnished that both golden and blue amber of the cosmos contains life, with the description of residual and ancient marking them as different forms of the same substance. The magic of the ancestral followers also draws upon life, meaning that magic is life itself. One then must ask, what is the nature of life itself? That even in a world dominated by the Elden Ring's metaphysical laws and its golden order under the purview of the greater will, that magic transcends all.
So, not to like come across as too negative, but I wonder if that summary there might be a little bit too reductive. Well, I don't necessarily disagree with some of the thoughts behind it in general, with magic representing life to an extent. I don't know if it's necessarily fair to imply that it would mean like magic is all life, which you didn't say explicitly, but that I do feel like that's kind of implied here. And part of the reason why I'm like hesitating and like thinking about this as we're going is because life is a bit of a mystery in Elden Ring. Ha ha ha. I mean, it's a mystery in real life to an extent as well. But what I mean by that is it's not clear if life in Elden Ring is stuck in a kind of dualist function in terms of like body and mind / soul, or like body and spirit slash soul, especially with like the way it's represented between Ronnie and Godwin in particular, or if there's a third component as well between like mind, body, gold, memory, or what have you, you know? So the whole glintstone stuff gets a bit problematic for me because in the real world, life, you know, is purely the domain of organic beings, but it's questionable whether or not that's the case for Elden Ring as well, because we have inorganic crystallians that are alive somehow. We have golems, which, you know, golems are golems, so they could be like essentially robots. Doesn't really matter. Synthetic life, not like real life. But crystallians are certainly problematic. Whatever happens to Lusat and Azur is also kind of questionable, because like the glintstone is eating their minds, and like their brains and skulls are getting replaced by glintstone, which is metal as hell. And then there was one other thing that I wanted to bring up with that, but I'm drawing a blank right now. Glintstone cancer? Okay. So yeah. Magic, life, spirit. And so yeah, like going back to the whole like faith, arcane, and intelligence trifecta here, it isn't, I don't know if it's fair to just say like magic as a blanket statement could be like encompassing life. If it might encompass a certain element of life, but yeah, I don't know.
Looking at the fire giant in-game, it seems From Software drew inspiration from Roman mythology in the form of Vulcan. The fire giant's fire, smithing, its lame leg that we can break, an allusion to Vulcan's crippled leg after being hurled from Olympus, and the eye of Jupiter, a sign of the king of the gods.
You know what? Sorry, this has nothing to do with the video, but it just kind of like popped in my head right now for some random reason. I'm assuming it must be possible to like kill the fire giant without harming its lame leg, but I haven't tried to do it, and I actually haven't seen a video, which isn't to say they don't exist. I just never thought to like look to see what happens if you just try to kill him outright without hitting that leg. I'm assuming it'll just like play the cutscene like normal, and it's like a health threshold type thing, but it'd just be kind of funny if you avoid hitting that leg only for him to like fall down and like break it himself. Kind of like the one Metal Gear game, I think it was, where you, or is that one Call of Duty, where you like snipe someone from 2 miles away. So if you put the reticle on the dude that you're trying to assassinate and shoot him in the head, the cutscene will just have like the guy's arm fall off. So that's just kind of like what comes to mind with that mental imagery of like purely damaging his other leg, or like his torso with like magic or something like that. Okay.
After being hurled from Olympus, and the eye of Jupiter, a sign of the king of the gods, seem to reference these myths. Furthermore, Far Mazula has storms, eagles, and lightning, all symbols of Jupiter. For what reason then did FromSoft purposely decide to use this mythological imagery in-game? Giordano Bruno was an Italian Renaissance-era philosopher and theologian. He was influenced by Hermetic and Neoplatonic ideas, along with Egyptian mysticism. He also received training as a Dominican friar earlier in life. He is best known for advancing cosmic pluralism, the idea of an infinite universe, and as a martyr for free thought. He was captured by the Inquisition in 1592, tried, then burned at the stake in Rome in the year 1600 for heresy. He was charged with denying fundamental Catholic doctrines, such as eternal damnation, the Holy Trinity, the divinity of Christ, and more. His book, The Expulsion of the Triumphant Beast, was used as primary evidence against him. The Expulsion is a philosophical dialogue that is heavy with allegory. It uses ancient myths to disguise as criticisms of Christianity. In it, Jove, or Jupiter, convenes a council of gods to rearrange the constellations above, thus reforming the world below. The description for the black leather shield states, round shield covered in black leather, on the larger size for a medium-sized shield. From the north, this shield depicts the polar star in rivets of gold. The inside is lined with fur, protecting the carrier from frost. In the expulsion, Ursa Major is the primary constellation banished. It is expelled from its exalted position beside Polaris, also known as the Polar or North Star. These constellations represent vices. They are to be replaced with their counterparts that represent virtues. They are formed into a personality of a beast. It is made up of primarily solar influence, with jovial, Jupiter, and venereal, Venus as well. The triumphant beast's vices are the ignorance, superstition, and prejudice that make up its being. Renewal implies that it has distorted man's reason throughout all ages. It is only when man governs himself by the religion of reason, by understanding the laws of nature, that he can expel the triumphant beast from within. In the expulsion, Jove represents every man, guided by a certain intelligence within us. Specifically, he is symbolic of the Renaissance man, profoundly disturbed by new religious, philosophical, and scientific ideas of his time. His pursuit of power and wealth above all else has made him old and decrepit, signifying man's decline of beauty and majesty. He fears the fate of mutation or fate that governs all, even himself. He seeks to purge the constellations to renew himself, the beastly images in heaven, such as Pisces and Ursa Major. This is done because he is scared of being replaced by another deity, such as Saturn. The moral reform that Jove engages in represents man seeking to better himself. The game's references to real-world constellations such as Polaris could be an intentional nod to the expulsion's influence. It is also clear to me that the final boss of Elden Ring is the game's own triumphant beast that the Tarnished must fight to expel its influence from the Elden Ring and the world at large.
Okay, I was going to say with that section, I don't want to say like it felt a little bit redundant, but maybe a little bit fatiguing going into like the backstory. It would have been a little bit nicer if you tied that back to the game between a couple of the parallels there, which isn't to say like it was bad or anything. It's just like sometimes it's a little bit easy to get lost in the sauce and forget or like not necessarily know how you're trying to tie it into the game specifically, because people can make their own inferences, but that might not always be what you're trying to imply. And I'm sure I do the same thing in my videos, by the way, so don't feel like singled out by that.
It also
And also, Teen Sith, welcome back to chat, and Mia Jepson, nice to see you again.
From the heavens, just as the triumphant beast did in the expulsion. The greater will would be Bruno's Jove. Wealth sent a beast made up of stars down to the world below. Perhaps the ancient dragons visually represent the aforementioned influences upon their nature, with their golden flesh of the solar Apollo, for he is said to be the governor of life, their flames of Venus, for love is symbolized by fire, and their lightning of Jove, the color of the red crucible, perhaps because it is said Jove created life. What about the eye of Jupiter that appears on the fire giant's chest? It is fair to bring up the counterpoint that the eye seems exclusively tied to the fell god without further hard evidence. There are several reasons I believe the eye can be tied to the greater will. In Roman mythology, Vulcan is the son of Jupiter, hurled from Mount Olympus. He was cast off by Minerva for having a repulsive appearance. When he landed in the ocean, he broke his leg, which never healed properly. In Elden Ring, the lame leg of the fire giant in the forge evokes these myths visually. The title fell for the fell god could mean it was an evil deity. Instead, I think it may have fell from the heavens, impacting the lands between in ancient times.
So that seems to be more of an English reading of fell, which is perfectly fine, and I think it is also fair to question whether or not fell giant, or like the flames of the fell god specifically, is GRRM-ism or like a Miyazaki-ism. And so if it was originated in the English first, I do think this kind of a comparison might be more fair. But if it's Japanese first, I don't think it necessarily works, because fell is used in the kanji for like evil. So like Jashin is essentially what he's called, like the evil god. So fell god which is a different form from Fel, as in like the Fel Omen, which you didn't bring that up. I'm just kind of like bringing it up for trivia reasons. So setting that aside for a moment here, I will admit that this part is kind of hard to follow along because I'm not entirely sure how this stuff is supposed to tie into Gnosticism or alchemy specifically. So it seems to be pulling in a completely different direction when I'm not necessarily like on board with the original premises, which were interesting and entertaining enough that I was, like willing to continue to like go along with them. But now I'm just like not sure why this is relevant despite your kinds of what's the words? Despite you like setting this up here, like I'm kind of following along, but I'm waiting for you to like come back and tie it like, together again. Feels like a different video. Yeah. You think it's partly the pacing and tone of the script read? Are there pauses being edited out? So keep in mind that this is Elden Enthusiast's first video, and there are like section breaks, but section breaks, well, I do think they are effective for what they are. They aren't like a panacea or panacea, however you pronounce it, that will like completely be able to reset a person's mental state. So one thing you can do to help like reset people would be adding longer pauses during the chapter break transitions, whether you fill those pauses with music or like quotes or something else, or do a little bit of both, and then a little bit of another setup or like a pivot in directions with your script itself, saying like now setting aside like Gnosticism, we're going to turn to this, and then maybe explaining why that's relevant to the rest of the video might help. And to be fair, I haven't personally done a video where I've like actually chopped it up into chapters. That's probably something I should consider doing, but like I said before, I'm a bit of a flow state writer, so I don't know the most eloquent way to handle this myself. So with that being said, I would possibly suggest turning to other lore creators who've done that in the past. Smowtown stands out to me right now as somebody who I've seen that does use chapter breaks. I don't necessarily know exactly how effective they are, but yeah, at the very least, you might be able to like look at his transitions and steal some ideas there. All right. Ponyboy, nice to see you again. Yeah, 90 minutes on a first upload is crazy. Well, Elden Enthusiast has been like talking about making this video for months, pretty much. Probably like half a year, if not longer. Almost as long as I've known him. You can see what I'm getting at. You mentioned Bruno being influenced by Hermeticism and Platonic ideas, but you absolutely could have tied it together better. Because later in the video that you should have moved, you tie Bruno to the alchemical tradition. Yeah, so you did bring up Hermeticism earlier as well, and I can see the parallels between Hermeticism and Gnosticism as well, but this is what I would say is like one of the cases of like the positive effect of Dunning-Kruger like gone wrong. Dunning-Kruger? Anyway, where you're too familiar with the topics at hand, so what might seem a very natural transition to you might not be natural for like somebody who's not as familiar with the topics at hand, which is a very easy pitfall to fall into, especially the more and more research you do into a topic, which is why I suggest like having other people like proofread your material, which you may have had done, and you might not just have gotten like the feedback you needed. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at right now. And okay, 9 months, yeah, understandable. Yeah, Teetsith is saying that your vocal delivery is a bit flat, and I can tell that because it seems like you're deliberately slowing down your pace of words, that that kind of naturally flattens one's normal affect in their voice that will give like the natural variance and like the tone of a conversation. So generally speaking, I will give you like a high grade in terms of like your enunciation and speaking clearly. But this is where it actually gets really difficult for the content creator, at least for me personally, in trying to read something slowly, yet also enunciate in such a way where you do have that variance in pitch and whatnot to make it sound a bit more natural. And with that being said, another big pitfall that I think it's really easy to fall into is to inadvertently deliver all of your lines the same way. And I honestly don't know like a good way to describe how to avoid that pitfall other than just being aware of how you're delivering lines, listening to them as you deliver them, and then also listening to the way that you deliver your lines in relation to the lines around it. So whether or not you're going one line at a time, which I would not suggest doing, or if you're doing it a paragraph at a time, paragraphs are better, but it can also be awkward transitioning from one paragraph to the next. And I also have issues with this. Like, I'm not the best narrator by any means, especially when I need to slow down. So yeah. And of course, like, I'm not trying to say like your video is bad. I'm just saying like these are ways that you can improve. And I think like this is just something that all like video essayists need to work on. And it's really easy to undervalue this skill because the people who are incredible at it, like their job is literally to make people not notice that there's craft behind their craft, you know? So like people like Tom Scott, Michael from Veritasium, to come across as being able to deliver a casual, friendly conversation, but also being able to deliver it at a speed which is very easily parsed by the audience is such a huge undervalued skill that I didn't realize how much of a skill it was until I started doing this and or like public speaking in general. And like in some ways, like I would argue that this is, it can be more difficult than public speaking because of the audience variance that comes with having an online presence. That's exactly it. Deliberately slowed your voice for consistency and being clear. Plus, you did use some programs to clean up your audio since your sound setup is garbage. Yeah, that's understandable. Pointy Boy says, the only real way is treating it like a script and memorizing a comfortable chunk, delivering it like a character rather than an info read. That can be a method of doing it, but to be fair, like as they say, sometimes a plan executed quickly is better than a perfect plan executed too late. And that is like really true to an extent for content creation as well, because like motivation and burnout are real big factors that are just kind of wild cards, because life can throw whatever the hell it throws at you, and sometimes you just need to get the final product out of the door so you can work on the next one. And you just kind of have to live with it and kind of learn with it and just kind of grow as you go. But yeah, so just try to take this stuff as constructively as possible. Like, it took me a long time of like making my videos at the really poor quality that I did, and gradually getting some like audience feedback to get to where I am, to even be able to be like cognizant of these issues as well. So I know my streams have helped you, like for me, like talking about this stuff. So hopefully like this advice will prove valuable as well, because just to like build you up as well, like this video that you've produced is so much higher quality than like my first dozen, probably, maybe more. So yeah, don't feel bad by any means. Like you're like way further beyond where I initially started. But to be fair, I also knew that I was going to be garbage at like editing, like getting used to things. So my very first video, I kind of knew was going to be kind of a garbage video to like kind of get my feet wet. And my second video is definitely a lot better, but it's definitely very rough around the edges. So yeah. Hey, howdy, how's it going? Yeah, and as Ponyboy says, like, this isn't necessarily like you delivering the lines completely flat. It's that when you slow down, it takes a little bit more attention to kind of accentuate aspects of your speech. So you kind of play a caricature of yourself. When you slow down, you have to kind of, in a weird way, like, be able to not like project, accentuate, accent, no. Exaggerate. Okay, you need to be able to exaggerate speech, but when you exaggerate speech, you very much so run the real risk of coming across as being fake, or as we talked about in chat a little bit yesterday, doing the so-called TikTok voice. So there's pros and cons to both. It's honestly a real skill, and it just needs actual practice, and needs to be developed over time, or like through practice and multiple takes. So don't necessarily like ham it up. So okay, I guess I'll go through my hidden archives here. Let me pull up my audio folder for you guys. All right. What would be a good one? The Grace of Old. I don't think I had a lot of retakes here, but I do remember one that stands out specifically. So this is going to be kind of gross and nasty, not like literally, but just like to me personally, the way that I delivered the lines. So, oh my God, Windows, come on, man. Okay, there we go. I don't remember which ones they were specifically. So this is the way that I tend to oh God, screw it. Okay, so this is the way that I tend to like just type out or label my like audio stuff. I just do it numerically, which isn't the best system, but it works well enough. And then if I know I'm going to be quoting a character, I'll just type in like their name or whatnot. So if I do a retake, I'll just use a decimal and put like a 1. And this is a little bit deceptive because it's not like I get all of these done in the first try. It's definitely not true. So what happens is I will just get rid of the garbage takes off the get-go, and then I keep the ones that are like kind of okay. And then as I listen through them, I see like if they're good enough. So here we go. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. The fundamental tenets of the Golden Order are the laws of causality and regression. Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation, and regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. So right here, I would say that I'm speaking a bit quickly, slightly, ever so slightly, and I'm not giving like the right amount of like pauses between the terms, or between the sentences, and a lot of that stuff can be fixed in post, which isn't that big of a deal. There might be more like later on that I don't remember, but I'm just gonna like switch to the second take to give you guys like a comparison. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. And just like the delivery of that line right there is significant enough where like there's a kind of like vocal clarity to it where, at least for me personally, I'm better able to focus on the individual words and the actual like meaning of the sentence than how I delivered it in the first example. And I can't exactly tell you how or why. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. Okay, so I think right there, the way that I delivered it was too flat, which I think is kind of the criticism that you're getting here right now. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. And this one, I think I just relaxed a bit more, and I wasn't necessarily holding as much breath in and trying to get like the full line out, which is a real pain in the ass. And the real grinding of the sausage in content creation is like editing out like a lot of the stuff that you don't want people to see. So if I like breathe into the mic, or if I have like mouth noise in between like lines and whatnot, I will manually like cut out the gaps between my words at times to make the audio be more crisp. And this is a lot of extra work that most people probably won't notice, but I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, and that stuff kind of stands out to me, especially the more I listen to it as I like go through the editing process. It just kind of like, yeah, anyway, hopefully that helps you. I'll play the first example again and the second one a little bit more just to try to give you more direct feedback, and I'll read chat as I like let this play. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. The fundamental tenets of the Golden Order are the laws of causality and regression. Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation, and regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. These descriptions are pretty abstract, though, and can be difficult to understand. For what it's worth, causality comes from Inga in Japanese, which is the Buddhist term for karma. While karma is typically thought of as a kind of cosmic debt and is associated with reincarnation, this doesn't quite cover the full meaning. There are disagreements based on differing schools of thought, but generally speaking, karma is the result of cause and effect. In some ways, it can be likened to the butterfly effect, where the current state of the world is influenced by past events, and the state of the world in the future will be influenced by actions taken in the present. So like this stuff right here isn't necessarily bad, but it doesn't quite have the impact or grab that I want. And probably my final version isn't like as good as I really want it, but it's just like, there's only so many times I could bear reading through the same lines. So if I get something good enough, I just might say, screw it. Sometimes a second reading can just go really well, and it can just be good. Sometimes I take elements from the first read and combine it with the second, which sometimes you can hear in like the vocal quality between takes. But yeah. All actions have consequences. Thus, it's pertinent to perform actions which will result in good karma or positive influences in the future, and it's also why someone can be told they need to deal with their karma or events from the past which continue to have influence over them in the present. And so right there, the way that I emphasized karma didn't come off quite the way that I wanted to, so it just sounded a little bit stilted or disjointed, and so here's like the revised. But the moon may not be the only force which holds sway over fate and destined death. The fundamental tenets of the Golden Order are the laws of causality and regression. Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation, and regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. These descriptions are pretty abstract, though, and can be difficult to understand. For what it's worth, causality comes from Inga in Japanese, which is the Buddhist term for karma. While karma is typically thought of as a kind of cosmic debt and is associated with reincarnation, this doesn't quite cover the full meaning. There are disagreements based on differing schools of thought, but generally speaking, karma is the result of cause and effect. In some ways, it can be likened to the butterfly effect, where the current state of the world is influenced by past events, and the state of the world in the future will be influenced by actions taken in the present. So here, it isn't necessarily just speaking slower, it's also giving more time between words, which, you know, in some ways is speaking slower, but it's letting things settle and carry their own weight before you move on to the next thing. So hopefully like this can help you. Sorry if like this drags on a bit too long. This can be a bit like tedious, but yeah. It just kind of goes with the territory, I suppose. Yeah, and if anybody doesn't know, VLimit is also a content creator in the chat. He makes some super high quality stuff that I envy. And he's also inspired me to make better content as well, which is part of why like I went so all out on the last one in terms of like making like my own custom item description box, which I think worked out really well in terms of like the compositional balance between things on the screen and whatnot. So yeah, definitely check out his channel. It's really, really good.
Vulcan is also the son of Jove, and I've wondered if the eye is a sign of the fell god's true heritage. If you're still not convinced, I'll go over the usage and symbolism of the eye of Jupiter in the Renaissance eventually, so bear with me for now. Now to go over Bruno's philosophy in great detail. He developed his idea of an absolute one from pre-Socratic philosophers such as Anaphanes and Heraclitus. This was a departure from the ideas of Aristotle that dominated the Middle Ages and Renaissance, Pythagoras also had a great influence on Bruno. Pythagoreans considered the human as a microcosm in relation to the universe, pervaded by divinity. Pythagoreans taught that the universe breathes as a unitary reality. From Cicero, the philosopher, they conceived divinity as anima mundi, the world soul, one soul interweaving with all nature. For Bruno, all the living organisms on the earth are connected. The difference between a human and a horse is merely one of degree. Reason does not exalt humans above the rest of nature. Bruno had rejected Christian dogma and considered Christian ethics developed by the churches to be generally harmful. He was wary of the use of the term God. In his book, Cause, Principle, Unity, he preferred terms like Nerne or Divinita, Jove or gods. He tended to use God only when he was thinking of absolute substance or matter. Jove was a common allegorical name for the Christian God at the time, a reference to the Hebrew name Jehovah. This is because he made a distinction between God's transcendent and immanent aspects. The transcendent God is known as absolute truth, first principle and cause of all things, the one being. The immanent or knowable.
You got a typo there. All right, so I went a little bit past the point. Let me back up because I wanted to address it. This is pretty minor, but I think within the context of it, what do you say? Okay, when you said he tended to use God only when he was thinking of absolute substance or matter, I think it would have been nice if you gave some context as to what that meant to him specifically there. Because, well, I think we could kind of get at what you're talking about here. It would probably be a little bit better to keep everybody on the same page rather than to let their assumptions or speculation go wild.
Jove was a common allegorical name for the Christian God at the time, a reference to the Hebrew name Jehovah. This is because he made a distinction between God's transcendent and immanent aspects. The transcendent God is known as absolute truth, first principle and cause of all things, the one being. The immanent or knowable God is nature. I quote, "Nature works within matter, or rather, it is matter itself." End of quote.
Okay, yeah, if you'd bumped that up a little bit earlier, that would have made it crystal.
The matter, or rather, it is matter itself. End of quote. Nature then is God or the divine, manifested in all things. The allusion to Jove as the great cosmic tailor corresponds to the idea of the Neoplatonic demiurge, but Bruno delegates God to an absolute that has nothing to do with humans except as manifested in the physical world. Soul to Bruno was the principal emotion that bonded atoms together, determining the identity of a body. The universe was an organism in each principal body.
So that idea of soul being tied to motion is really cool. I'm trying to imagine how exactly I think that would work in Elden Ring, which might not necessarily be your point here, but I just think that's a neat idea that I want to kind of like play with in my head a little bit. So yeah, I'm not going to do that like live on stream, but just saying like that gets the gears turning there.
Identity of a body. The universe was an organism in each principal body, such as
that dude looks like a banished knight. Sorry.
the planets, and the life sustained on it, participated in a common animating principle, the world soul. In the same way, the parts of the human body were animated by the one and same soul. The world soul is present wholly and indivisibly in each and every thing. To borrow an analogy, it is like a great voice that can be heard by everyone in a room, no matter how large or how many occupy it. All things, animate or not, contain some life. They are vivified by the universal soul. There is also the universal intellect. Like the Neoplatonic intellect, it comprises the ideas. These are also known as forms, or the essences of all things. For Plato, the world of ideas or eternal forms are in the mind of God. Physical objects are mere shadows of his divine reality of forms in the mind of God. It is the inner, most essential, and characteristic faculty of the universal soul. It operates immanently from within universal matter, like an internal craftsman. It articulates its effects through division. For example, a seed becomes a stem, then come branches, and so on and so forth.
That's a good quote. Let me reread that. It articulates its effects through division.
A seed becomes a stem.
Interesting. Yeah, because I was going to ask how that idea of like the universal soul compares to the way that like Godwin has been like destroyed in spirit, or like his soul may have been destroyed, and what you think about that in relation to this idea here, because that's like kind of one sticking point that gives me pause for like really considering it more seriously there. So I also wanted to say thank you, Northern Tommy, for stopping by. Hopefully we will see you again, whether that be later tonight or perhaps on the next stream. Take care.
Then come branches, and so on and so forth. It is God as mind, imprinting upon everything its proper nature. All cognitive acts, and whatever animal or separate intelligence, were instantiations of a signal cognitive power. They were derived from the universal intellect, and ultimately, therefore, from God as mind. Whatever exists in some way, knows in some way. Even supposedly inanimate things observe this principle and show traces of intelligence. A stone held aloft will seek to return downwards to the earth, because that is where it was in its optimal condition. The description for the crystal staff states, "Staff fashioned from pure crystal, a deed impossible for a human, enhances crystalline sorceries. The crystallion's faint cognition is known as the wisdom of stone. This staff can only be wielded by those of intellect high enough to grasp such wisdom. Is the wisdom of stone the knowledge of a universal intellect animating all things? I'd like to think so. The world soul contains an indefinite variety of possible forms. Due to the power of matter, certain forms attain a determined existence. To put it another way,
All right, so Elden says his soul was killed. That's a good point. Instead of returning to the Erd Tree, you'd say it returned to a great cosmic sea of souls, the world soul. So just to kind of recontextualize my question, is that if Godwin's soul is destroyed but his body remains, does his body still contain aspects of the so-called world soul? Has only a specific aspect of his soul, a specific division of his soul, been destroyed? And you might not necessarily have to have the answer to that kind of question, but that's just kind of like what gets brought up to mind within this context here. The world tree. Oh man, who knew the Berserk created the world tree first? Can I kill Notbat? Nope, cannot do it.
temporary individual unity is due to the infinite power of matter made of the divine to unify or hold forms in existence. Universal matter, on the other hand, is dimensionless, impassive, and inactive. Universal matter had the potentiality to become all things. Wood was a substance and act, because it was that from which a bed, stool, or image could be made, not because it was any one of those things. The same was true of universal matter. According to Bruno, Jove is a two-faced character. He is benevolent at one time, then violent and dangerous at the next.
All right, so Elden Enthusiast asked if I could repeat the question. Okay, so if Godwin died and his soul was destroyed potentially, and his soul, for all intents and purposes, leaves his body, would not his body continuing to exist still within this paradigm here have aspects of the so-called world soul within it? Is the part of Godwin's soul that died a specific division from the world soul, and so that way you could potentially reconcile that idea that Godwin's soul died, but he should still have like matter essentially within his body that gets left behind there? Because I don't exactly know Gnosticism super well here, but from these arguments, I don't think there should be too much distinction between that which exists in nature and the soul or the essence and spirit of such things. And so to me, it would almost argue, or almost seem to be, that body and soul, or just being, is inseparable from reality. And I feel like some aspect of Godwin's being quote unquote destroyed might go at odds with the idea, but maybe you can like think of it another way. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer there. Sorry, I recognize that was a weird thing to ask, to borrow from a meme.
This is a result of his participation in the fluctuating world of matter, or eternal change in the universe. I quote, "So if in bodies, matter, and eternity there were not mutation, variety, and vicissitude, there would be nothing agreeable, nothing good, nothing pleasurable." End quote. Jove is an embodiment of the anima mundi, the world's soul, not to be identified with the first principle of all others, but rather an agent created by it. I quote, thus.
I'm going to re-listen to that quote there. And Elden Enthusiast will have to think on that. Soul forms the body. I don't necessarily know if the soul does form the body. I just don't know if the two can be divided in this paradigm, is kind of like my question. So Ponyboy says, it depends. In Gnosticism, the divine doesn't exist on our reality. The whole issue with the demiurge is that it's a god that was created by the spiritual and physical by Sophia. Yes, I am kind of familiar with that, but I don't know exactly how much Gnosticism fully applies here, or if like this is just like this specific thing that we're talking about, which I can't exactly remember because there's a lot of info going around. So yeah. Divine is really more of a radiation that seeps into our plane. So, right. My question is, like, does destruction still exist, like, literally? Or is destruction just essentially a reconfiguration? Or, let me try to rephrase this a little bit better. So, can things be destroyed in Gnosticism, or is the idea of destruction a bit of a misunderstanding of reconstitution? And I recognize that's probably not the best way to describe it. So, to give an analogy, like if your body dies, you could say like, oh, like the person is destroyed, which is kind of true. But from a different point of view, you could say like, they're decomposing, which is just kind of like a different form of personhood, but isn't necessarily like the person anymore. So like the idea of person's destroyed, but if you believe that like everything is one and that a person isn't necessarily separate from their body or their soul or whatnot, and if death still exists, does that mean like there's destruction, or is it just like the same person in a different form, I guess? I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense. Orange Right Gold, welcome on in. Basically, is death life 2 Electric Boogaloo? Maybe. I don't know. Eldon says, destruction is merely a reconfiguration, changing of forms essentially in Bruno's ontology. Thank you. And okay, yeah, that's kind of exactly my question there. So, reconfiguration. With that in mind, comparing Bruno's ontology to Elden Ring specifically, in your estimation, and you don't have to have an answer for this, would you say that Godwin's soul or spirit being destroyed means it was actually destroyed, or do you think it is just in a different, unrecognizable form from its original form within his like body? I guess would be my question. All right, Howdy, you have a good night, and thanks for dropping in as always. Okay, Pony says you don't have an answer, but from their context, destruction of the divine specifically would be a misunderstanding. Yes. Okay, and that would be perfectly fine if there is a misunderstanding. And I guess, like, we could also say, like, the stuff with Elden Ring could be, like, more of an allegorical type of destruction and not necessarily, like, literal. If you want to ascribe a more, like, literalistic or fundamentalistic view of Gnosticism to Elden Ring specifically. Teddy HH, welcome on in. You think Godwin's soul is in a void without consciousness until his body is destroyed. Okay, so you still think that his soul is out there. That's interesting. I don't know if we have evidence for or against it, so I'll just kind of like treat it as a maybe, a potentiality. So Eldon says, you'd say it was dissolved from its individual form. The soul of Godwin is no more. Okay, so you think his soul still exists, but it's essentially like been the equivalent of a decomposed body, in that the soul essence is still there, just not in the shape of Godwin, essentially. You never thought about Godwin's soul in the way I'm asking. Okay, no, that's perfectly fine. The golden fundamental Gnosticism. That is kind of what we're discussing. And is this your first time chatting tonight without horns? I thought you might have been here earlier. But if so, welcome in. You think I am making too much of a conflation of Godwin's body and soul as though they're intrinsically linked? The body being devoid of the soul is the issue. So I think that's a good question or like point that you're bringing up. However, my original point in asking this question is that, and I probably should have restated this, but I kind of like forgot about it in like the train of consciousness right there, is that if body and soul and whatnot are like 100% divine, then is it fair to say that like the two can be separated? I think within the paradigm offered here right now, there shouldn't be such a distinction between body and soul according to Gnosticism. But of course, like I have no idea. That's just kind of like what I've picked up so far. And if that is the case, that body and soul should not be separated, then what does it say that we're told Godwin's soul was destroyed if we're to buy into this framework? And I could have flawed premises here, so feel free to correct me there. Just because his body is alive doesn't mean his soul is what's powering that life. It's essentially a husk without a person at the wheel, just his flesh doing what flesh does. No, I'm fine with that, but I'm just curious how that is reconciled within this idea of Gnosticism specifically. Teddy says, you also need to ask what is the lands between. That way you understand where Godwin's soul is currently or not. I think that is a very good question, but unfortunately we don't have enough textual information to say one way or the other. So I kind of feel like we have to leave that alone for now. But I do think that is certainly a fundamental question that we should be asking ourselves, but not one that I think we can answer. Okay, you only said hi earlier. Okay.
Mamundi, the world's soul, be nothing agreeable, nothing good, nothing pleasurable. End quote. Jove is an embodiment of the anima mundi, the world's soul, not to be identified with the first principle of all others, but rather an agent created by it. I quote, thus, it has not been vainly said that Jove fills all things, inhabits all parts of the universe, is the center of all that has being, one and all, and that through which one is all, which, being all things, and comprising all being in itself, brings about that everything is in everything. End quote. The basis of the whole universe is one, and the component atoms are never destroyed, but pass from one form to another. This applies even to Jove himself, who is not eternally the same, always receiving and giving out particles of the cosmic infinity. Though eternal bodily substance will change, as in Jove, it itself is indestructible. Jove, Bruno tells us elsewhere, I quote, is not to be taken as too legitimate or true representative of the primal and universal origin, but himself exemplifies the principle of eternal change. End quote.
All right, so I might have gotten a little bit ahead of myself there, but I still feel like my question does apply, that if we're told like specifically that Godwin's soul was destroyed, we could interpret that as kind of like bodily destruction, in that just like the component parts get broken down into different things, so it's no longer Godwin, but his spirit or his spiritual essence still may exist in a different form. I think that's fair. And at the very least, this would argue that destruction doesn't exactly exist in Gnosticism, perhaps similarly to the idea of like the conservation of matter and whatnot as well. Or I should say the theory, but okay. Ponyboy said, as far as they know, body and soul are separate things. Divinity is not meant to inhabit physicality and reality, and it's why the demiurge is a petulant tyrant in Gnosticism. Thank you. That's a good point to bring up as well, that like, yeah, okay. I see what you're saying there. Hey, Summit Streams, welcome on in. You said, do we know that death is synonymous with destruction in Elden Ring? That's a good question. I probably should double check the language used right now. I'm pretty confident that destruction is used in relation to death in some capacity, and destruction relating to Godwin specifically, but I'm kind of making an assumption right here. Okay, so at least with the minor Erdtree Guardians, it said that their deaths led not to destruction. Oh no, this is the Japanese thing. Okay. Well, no, yeah. Well, so yeah, the whole idea of destruction is kind of directly related to death in the form of like the minor Erdtree Guardians. Now let me double check. What would it be? The Rune of Death? What's it called? Hello brand? Maybe I should just like look up Godwin instead. Yeah, maybe this isn't the best thing to do on stream just because I'm like literally looking through all the pieces of text which just say. I don't know if this would work. The Remembrance of the Lich Dragon. So, after Godwin the Golden became the Prince of Death, the ancient dragon fought long and hard against the death within its companion. Last victory was never achieved, and its only reward was corruption. So I don't think corruption right here kind of works in that same context. And then you could say like in the way that this description is written, I should probably pull it up for you guys. In the way the description is written, you might be able to argue that Godwin still kind of exists, but in a different form here. With him becoming the Prince of Death. Let me double check the Japanese there. Yeah, it's okay, that's good enough. Death Lightning. Now corrupted by death. Yeah, okay. Not exactly what I'm looking for. Yeah, I don't know if destruction really comes up in any other contexts. And slew Godwin the Golden. I feel like it should have been there's something that I can't remember the exact description off the top of my head. I think it should be the half mark wheel of the centipede, but I can't actually remember what it's called. All right, so let me look at chat again. Okay, where are we at? Teddy says, in reincarnation mythoses, you're only allowed to have one body. Since Godwin's body is not dead, he's not allowed to get a new body. So we're kind of shown that that doesn't necessarily apply to Elden Ring implicitly or explicitly through Ronnie inhabiting the body of a doll. I guess that might technically not be reincarnation. You could say that Renala rebirthing the Karian scholars might apply, although you could just say that's a reconstitution or recombination rather than actual like reincarnation. Then you also have like the body swapping of Selin into Celavis puppet and things of that nature. Really depends on the authorial intent of destruction. Do souls get destroyed, or is that just how the people see the souls in the universe? Yeah, that's a very good question. And Scowleezy believes that destined death is probably the equivalent of obliteration. I'm not sure. Like, I think that's a very strong possibility, but I'm just not sure. Ponyboy says, what you would point out, though, is that Godwin's soul was meant to be taken back through the eclipse. So your thoughts are that the soul isn't destroyed. It is, in fact, out in the ether. I would disagree with you there, and I would say that's a bit of an assumption, because rebirth doesn't necessarily need to be the same person being reborn. Mikola could have potentially tried to revive, quote-unquote, Godwin by placing something else within him, perhaps similarly to the way that Selin replaces the soul of the person whose body she like commandeers in the form of a puppet. But yeah, setting that aside, I think nonetheless you bring up a good question with like all that. And Elden thinks that Miquella may have just been trying to give him a true death and to not revive him. And that might also be a possibility. I kind of am blanking on the actual terminology used between them, but I might need to revisit that. Teddy says, you may also have to define soul in Elden Ring because soul seems more like an accumulation of life energy rather than your will. And that's like one of the most difficult aspects of this, which is partially why I bring up this question originally, because like, if the soul is like a natural part of nature, I guess, for lack of a better description right now, then how much of the soul is separate from the body, or are they meant to be understood as the same thing within the baseline form of Gnosticism, is one of the questions that I had, or at least in Bruno's ontology. And then Ponyboy said, well, they're not exactly supposed to be the same in Gnosticism, which I think is a fair point. So this might just pertain to Bruno's ideas, but I might not just have enough context to make these questions. And a lot of these questions might be resolved in the rest of the video, to be fair. It's good to speculate on the mechanics of the world. You personally don't focus on that since you're more big picture and pointing parallels, but it's good to ask those questions. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. This is just kind of like one of the fun aspects, in my opinion, of like bringing up these points. Is like, okay, if you present this argument, let's take it to its most, like its fullest logical conclusion, and let's like play it out, the hand that we're dealt, to see the implications of what that means. Miquella seems to be of the opinion that Godwin is suffering. If his will is gone, that would not be Miquella's concern, in your opinion. I don't necessarily know if Miquella thinks Godwin is suffering as much as it is that he hasn't died a quote-unquote true death. And we do have enough environmental clues to pick up that a true death in Miquella's estimation may mean returning to the roots of the Erd Tree for your soul. But if Godwin is soulless, he cannot die a quote-unquote true death, and thus Miquella might just want him to like get that true death, but it might be impossible with like the current way that things are. And there could be the possibility that Godwin's quote-unquote destroyed soul could be like elsewhere, or like reconstituted in another form, or it could be obliterated entirely. We don't have the full picture, which is always frustrating when trying to dive into this section of the game, which, you know, connects to every section of the game, really. Okay, Elden says, Bruno's philosophy can't easily be categorized. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, thank you. Going back to the video now. Oh man, we're only halfway through. Not even.
As I've said before, Jove represents every one of us, man seeking to better himself. But how can Jove represent every one of us while also being the embodiment of the world's soul? The role of Jove is of divine providence, or God's intervention in the universe, called the too legitimate and good vicar or lieutenant of the first principle and universal cause. When Jove represents each one of us, he does not stand for our individuality. He stands for the rational soul and mind, with Olympus representing its separate faculties. Providence, then, functions as the life-giving principle in the world of the part related to the mind, reason, and will. In analogy of the world soul, we can call Providence a world will. Providence is Jove's highest act, with him being the world soul. Prudence, or the ability to govern and discipline yourself through reason, emanates from Providence. That is the corresponding faculty of Jove, who stands for all of us.
And I don't really mean to cut it off short again, but that idea of it all relating to the mind and the will and whatnot, setting like the whole like Elden Ring terminology issues aside of like what is mind, what is will, I'll go back to like the whole aspect of, do we consider Godwin as the Prince of Death technically alive in perhaps a different form than most normal life in the Lands Between? And if so, if Godwin is alive without a mind or a spirit or a will, what does that say for this worldview here, I guess?
We can see why the Roman Inquisition perceived Bruno's Pythagorean theories as a threat. While his natural philosophy never stipulates a denial of God, it essentially relegates him to an ineffectual, hopelessly insulated demiurge. If nature is God's vicar, then she is now the vicar of a deus absconditus, concealed God. In Bruno's own words, I quote, "So then, that God, as absolute, has nothing to do with us, except insofar as he communicates with the effects of nature and is more intimate with them than nature herself. Therefore, if he is not nature herself, he is certainly the nature of nature, and is the soul of the world, if he is not the soul herself." End quote.
I'm going to re-listen to that quote.
It's with the effects of nature, and is more intimate with them than nature herself. Therefore, if he is not nature herself, he is certainly the nature of nature, and is the soul of the world, if he is not the soul herself. End quote.
Okay, so I kind of get it. Like, it's nature plus one is essentially what they're saying. Like, yeah, the root of all things, I'm assuming here. Okay, so Elden asked, doesn't Godwin also protect Fia if you attack her too? It is arguable because, while the little skulls do pop out of his body kind of when you attack her. Let's see if I'm pretty confident I have footage of that. Just gotta wait for Windows search as per usual. Where are we at? So me throwing a knife at her, and so this could come from the body of Godwin. I think it might be a little bit clearer from a different angle. Whether or not it's supposed to be over her specifically or him. Slow-mo. Alright, so part of the reason why I say it's arguable, even though like it might directly come from his corpse, is that it raises the question whether or not it is like some consciousness or something within Godwin, or just a series of like spirits within him, like Rancor Call style. Because like, why would there be 6, 7 spirits rather than just like one big Godwin style thing is questionable. Fia asks Godwin, is that you, dear, when you do like hit her and cause this to happen? So she assumes it's Godwin, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's Godwin, depending like on how one feels about that. So it's arguable, but I think most people would say it's probably Godwin. Seems like it's centered on her too much. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if I have other angles of that. I don't think so. Actually, let me open up this one again. Maybe I moved the camera. No, I just did the slow-mo thing. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. So your head canon inserted here. You've never seen that? Okay. You never saw that because you're not an awful person. So it's all for the lore, guys. It's the lore. Summit Stream says, you think Nicholas went for his true death could be based on tradition rather than actually saving him? It's like a Christian feeling upset by not being able to ritualistically bury a loved one. Maybe. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we could slice it. And that's kind of one of my biggest gripes with the lore of Elden Ring, is that we've got all of this information which kind of tells us the facts of what happened. Well, not exactly, but you know what I mean. We've got all of these like expository statements, but we don't ever really get like the why of people's actions explained to us. So I just personally find that very frustrating and trying to understand the characters within the game world there. You think it'd be clear if the intent was that Godwin was doing it? It wouldn't come out of the base of his tail. I mean, I'm certain other people feel different ways. Yeah, we have their actions but little on their motivations. You feel the same way I do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of people feel that way. Teddy believes that Mikla is based on Hermes Trismegistus in the god of reincarnation. So to him, it seems his true goal is to kill Godwin so that he can reincarnate. I think that's a possibility. I'm not trying to shut any of that down. I just say, like, we don't have enough to, like, come up with a definitive answer. And so this is where, like, we're just going to have, like, lots of differences of opinion, I think.
When nature begins to inspire respect that rivals the Judeo-Christian God, the church would prove very intolerant.
All right, this is not super relevant to the video, but Elden, I'm going to ask if you've gotten any comments about your terminology use there, because I use that term in one of my videos. I don't remember which, and someone's like, "Oh, you don't use that term because it has like certain connotations. Like, why add Judeo? It's just like the Christian God." Well, I'm like, well, I don't know enough about what's the word? I don't know enough about like Islam to say like whether or not Abrahamic is an apt descriptor, because like their views are so different on certain things that So Judeo-Christian to me like represents a certain kind of like cultural common ground between Judaism and Christianity, which may or may not be shared with Islam, which I just don't know enough about. So didn't mean nothing by it, but some people really get up in arms about that terminology, apparently.
Rivals the Judeo-Christian God, the church would prove very intolerant. Bruno embraces paradox, or the coincidence of opposites, to reconcile the extremely large and small in the universe, as all is one. He aims to reconcile metaphysical and physical truths by integrating maxima and minima, infinite space, and the infinity of animated atoms or souls that constitute matter. It is the doctrine of identity as manifested through the appearance of opposites. Coincidence is both a spatial and a temporal category, meaning either occupation of the same place or occurrence at the same time. The principle of polarity is a mutual opposition between two attributes or ideas. Two contraries must be present for coincidence to occur. Polar opposites or contraries, such as black and white, hot and cold, cannot be identical.
So this is mostly fine. I'm just a little bit curious about two contraries must be present for coincidence to occur. I feel like I want a little bit more elaboration on that. So I don't know if is this like purely your words here? It doesn't like really matter too much. I'm just kind of curious because like a lot of this stuff just kind of like is, and I've thought this throughout the video, but I just haven't said anything about it yet, is very reminiscent of Taoism, but that isn't entirely relevant. So I was just kind of going to leave that there for now. So you don't have to elaborate on this now, but this is just kind of like a weird statement to me, unless I like probably just need to devote a lot more thought power to parsing it out.
Two contraries must be present for coincidence to occur. Polar opposites or contraries, such as black and white, hot and cold, cannot be identical. When you abstract sufficiently from circumstances, contraries such as positive and negative are interchangeable and indistinguishable. Bruno conceived the cosmos as an organic whole, and the coincidence of opposites in the cosmos operated to achieve a unity or synthesis of the contraries, all opposites coinciding in an infinite and divine oneness. Unity and multiplicity are interdependent and, in a sense, beget one another. The one cosmic spirit vivifies all. This is unity, yet the universe's multiple immaterial and formal manifestation, actuality and potentiality.
So for anybody who might be like lost in the sauce there, the way that this makes a lot of sense to me is compared to Taoism, as I was saying a moment ago. And I think the yin yang, if anybody's familiar with that, is kind of like a perfect encapsulation of that principle. And may as well like pull up a picture of it real quick. Not that I don't think you guys don't know what a yin yang looks like, but just so I get the visual imagery to kind of like talk about this more freely. So, okay, this will be good enough. So, yin and yang. Yin is known for chaos, femininity, night, blah, blah, blah. Yang could be day, so light and dark essentially, but there's more to it. The whole point is that these aren't two halves of a circle. It's that they lead into each other and they kind of have an element of each other within themselves. So they kind of exist in a cycle. And because one exists, the other also exists. So if the circle was not a circle and it was just completely white, there'd be no balance, and you wouldn't be able to distinguish where yin begins if it was all yang entirely. So that's kind of where like the dualism of Taoism, I think, is quite applicable to what's being discussed with Gnosticism and whatnot right now.
Are also opposite determinations, for what is actual cannot be merely potential, yet everything is both actual and potential. Bruno explains this through the concepts, the infinite active potency, or world soul, and the infinite passive potency, or matter. God had created all things from the two principles, the world soul and prime matter. These two potencies are constantly changing into each other through a coincidence of opposites. Universal matter and universal soul and intellect coincide in an undifferentiated unity. This is just as the circumference of an infinite circle and an infinite straight line, though distinct entities, coincide. Everything, material and spiritual, is continuously metamorphosing into everything else. Bruno's universe is one of perpetual motion and change. From the philosopher Nicholas Takusas, I quote, "God is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere," end quote. In other words, when taken to the infinite, all shapes and their elements lose their essence and ultimately coincide with one another. Cusanus first came up with the coincidence of opposites, and Bruno drew from his ideas heavily. Nicholas figures God as the maximum, and individuals things as minima. This means that these can never meet in our knowable world. They can, however, meet in their absolute, paradoxical coincidence, as Bruno also insisted. For Bruno, it is only at infinity that minima and maxima coincide, from the smallest atoms to the maximum, God. He created unity out of multiplicity. I quote, "Where there is opposition, there is action and reaction, there is movement, diversity, multiplicity, order, degrees, succession, and vicissitude," end quote. The coincidence of opposites is thus a doctrine of identity manifested through the appearance of opposites. As the philosopher Hegel once...
All right, M7MD Amin, welcome back to stream. Nice to have you again. You said you're lost. Yeah, it might not also help that you have joined midst the video, but I think what you do bring up is kind of a good point incidentally, in that it is a bit difficult at times to keep this stuff attached to Elden Ring the game, even though you did have the visual imagery of the rebus kind of representing American Radagon there. It can be a bit difficult to keep them connected because of how abstract the subject material is. This stuff is real complicated, and you could have simplified and clarified it in a lot of places. And I mean, sometimes that's just the nature of the beast, especially as you discuss such an abstract topic such as this.
Once said, I quote, "The eye with which God sees me is the eye with which I see him. My eye and his eye are one. The human being and God are one and the same." End quote. Back to the eye of Jupiter I mentioned earlier, Nicholas Cusanus said, I quote, "that God is hidden from the eyes of all sages." End quote. Because the ultimate one is thus invisible, his visible manifestations must be...
All right, I'm definitely lost why this is relevant right here. Okay, back to the eye of Jupiter. Nicholas Cusanus said, Okay.
said, I quote, that God is hidden from the eyes of all sages, end quote. Because the old...
Yeah, I'm not initially sure why that's relevant, and I'm assuming you're going to like talk about this now, but that was just kind of a really abrupt transition that I'm not sure how that like fits into what you were just talking about a moment ago.
Ultimate One is thus invisible. His visible manifestations must be manifold. In meditating on the face of God, Cusanus marveled at the many different faces ascribed to God by his followers. The union of contraries in the absconded or hidden God, whose blinding light is impenetrable darkness, is repeated by the various visions of God in minor and more imperfect degrees. Cusanus used the paradox of an all-seeing, unmoving eye of Jupiter to explain the hidden God. The motionless eye of God, for instance, is said to follow us everywhere. But can an eye stay at rest while it moves?
Okay, I kind of see what you're going for there, but I think you may have gone like one example too far, and if you tied the Eye of Jupiter idea directly into the last, I guess, I mean, you're kind of trying to do that. So, yeah, I think the ship has kind of already sailed on the Eye of Jupiter just because of like where it was in relation to this now, that it's kind of hard to keep track that the Eye of Jupiter initially sets you down this tangent here. Although to be fair, because I've like paused the video and discussed so many other things, that's definitely compounding the issue here. But the quotes and stuff that you were giving right before this felt a little bit redundant to me, given the context which immediately preceded it. And so this it kind of makes it a little bit harder to follow somehow. You see how abrupt it is, even though you're trying to tie the Eye of Jupiter to this coincidence of opposites. Okay. It's all good, Amin. We're all trying to learn as well.
To follow us everywhere. But can an eye stay at rest while it moves? Cusanus observed that if in the painting of a head the eyes are fixed on a spectator, the eyes will follow the spectator through a room without moving. If there are several spectators in the room, each will feel the eyes looking at him. Although the eyes in the painting appear to see all and everything, it is obvious that they do not move. The Mutability Cantos are two poems and stanzas by...
So I would say like that little insight right there is pretty good at trying to crystallize the essence of an idea, and that's probably a better way to approach these kind of parallels that you're making. But the transition into the mutability cantos just kind of comes out of left field. So that's, I feel like that's kind of been like a recurring issue throughout the video. So even though I think like a lot of your arguments are very like cogent and they do make sense, it's kind of hard to understand or to keep in mind how they're supposed to tie into Elden Ring without a little bit more guidance, I feel.
Do not move. The Mutability Cantos are two poems and stanzas by Edmund Spenser. They are generally considered to constitute a fragmentary Book 7 of The Fairy Queen, an epic English poem published in the 16th century. In it, Jove's sway over the universe is challenged by Mutability, the Titan goddess of change, who takes her case to a court presided over by nature. Her antagonist is Jove himself, judge of mankind, the embodiment of all order, who eternally resents her disruptiveness and creativity. Jove's all-seeing, unmoving eye may have been known to Spenser and his circle through Giordano Bruno, who owed much to Cusanus' philosophy. Bruno's Jove represents change in the universe, is the world's soul in his cosmology, and was relegated to a hidden god in the eyes of the Inquisition.
Okay, so I think I thought of a good way to describe it. So, I think the issue here, and this is something that you'll just need to get used to as like a content creator or like creating for a larger, broader audience, in that I think the way that your video essay is formatted would be perfectly fine for academia by any stretch of the imagination. However, with that being said, the YouTube target market audience isn't necessarily one of academics necessarily. So you would need to cater your material to appeal to like a wider audience and use, I don't want to say like simpler sentences, but you want to make simpler points and connect them in a way that they flow more naturally into each other. Now, when I say more naturally, that's probably a bit of a disservice to what you're actually doing because there is a certain amount of flow to them. But what I mean by that is there's a difference between like reading something and parsing it like through that like kind of mental abstraction versus more passively watching something and trying to parse all this information through auditory, well, mostly auditory forms in terms of like the quotes and whatnot. And also trying to keep in mind the points that you made earlier without necessarily having the quick luxury of being able to like just look back up a couple lines to see like to reread something if you get lost in thought or something like that. So that's kind of like one of the negative aspects of like the video format is that it is slightly more difficult to backtrack and it is more time consuming to do that. Because of these issues, I think it is pertinent for many content creators to make individual points more quickly, if that makes sense. It's the difference between being a science professor and a science communicator. Discrete chapters, even broken into multiple videos. You get exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, no, I'm glad. Yeah, so this is something like, even like a lot of my earlier stuff, like even some of my stuff now still has like a lot of this issue where like I'm trying to get to one point and tie it into the next without like losing the audience. I think that is the most difficult thing to do as a writer, especially as you're transitioning to different topics and trying to keep them relevant in the eyes of the beholder. And I don't know how like successful I am at it myself. So like, you know, take what I say with a grain of salt, but I'm just saying like that's kind of my goal. And that's why it takes me so long to produce like my long form videos. Like the last one you guys saw took me like 2 months, and there's like a month between like the first quote unquote draft, which is not really the first draft, and then the second draft that was publicly released, and then like another month between you saw like the final version of the video, you know. So okay,
with this in mind, I see the Eye of the Fire Giant in game as a representation of the greater will, the all-encompassing, all-seeing anima mundi hidden from the world. No wonder E.G. donned a tinfoil hat to hide from the greater will then. Bruno's universe is one of perpetual motion and change. Everything is both actual and potential. The universe is one of perpetual motion and change.
Damn it, why was it not going? Okay, so I think like what you tried to do there.
No wonder E.G. donned a tinfoil hat to hide.
I get what you did there, and I commend the effort, but it just kind of felt a little bit abrupt because for however many minutes, I don't even think you mentioned the game at all. Yeah, you haven't mentioned the game at all yet, except for the Eye of Jupiter. So like the sudden transition back to EG when you haven't necessarily directly tied like the anima mundi to the greater will, even though I think, you know, it can be inferred, and that's kind of like part of like the media literacy dependent on like the audience. It just felt very abrupt and might be a little bit of a non sequitur. It's probably more of a joke. Like I understand that much, but yeah, it's just kind of hard to like do that sudden mental switch within like when considering like how dense everything else was.
From the greater will then. Bruno's universe is one of perpetual motion
and so like right there is one of the moments where I think you want to have like a bit of a longer pause between your segments as far as like the editing is concerned. And I totally understand like why you didn't. It's because like when you're editing the thing, it takes a really long time to do so. So in your mind, it feels like there's plenty of space between the two, but it isn't necessarily that way for the audience. Okay.
Hat to hide from the greater will then. Bruno's universe is...
Yeah, so there's like as they say with like comedy, it's all down to timing. So you gotta, and that doesn't just like pertain to comedy alone. So just like giving more space to let things breathe is one of the like the more advanced tips I think that goes into like a content creation.
Is one of perpetual motion and change. Everything is both actual and potential. Bruno employs the word vicissitude to describe this core tenet of his philosophy. It is defined as an exchange or alternation between states of being or ideas, constantly shifting from one opposite to another and back again. For example, rest and motion. It is impossible to have one without the other. In this sense, we as human beings are able to contemplate the divine logos, universal divine reason. It is immanent in nature, yet transcending all oppositions and imperfections in the cosmos and humanity, the ultimate coincidence of opposites.
So, I don't think there's anything specific, like wrong within this segment on its own. However, I feel like this becomes a bit redundant within the context of everything else that was mentioned, like just momentarily ago. Or is that actually a little bit earlier? No. It might have been a little bit later. Yeah, with like everything in the motion, and when I was like talking about like Taoism and whatnot.
I quote Bruno, "Every opposition can be reduced to friendship, either by the victory of one or the other parties, or by harmony and tempering, or by some other principle of alternation, every rivalry to concord, every diversity to unity." End quote. To Bruno, the perfection of all comes from contraries, through contraries, into contraries, and to contraries. Where there is contrariety, there is action and reaction. Every being finds himself with a composition with such accidents and circumstances, due to differences arising from contraries. The coincidence of opposites is also an ethical doctrine for Bruno. It is the very basis of social and political relationships. It applies to the passing of ages, the rise and fall of civilizations, and change of religions as well. I will further explore this a bit in a later section.
So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure what that has to do with Elden Ring. It just feels like you're kind of trying to expand on Bruno and Gnosticism through Bruno, but it's been so long since this has tangibly been tied to Elden Ring that I feel like you're really going to be losing a lot of people here unless they just like the flow of the video and the thoughts that like come up with it.
On a cosmological level, Bruno's idea is that void, or space, though prior to matter, is always and everywhere filled with matter. Space as a receptacle able to contain bodies is not a body, it is incorporeal, but has dimensions. There is no difference between the region of space containing our world and every other region. Space is indifferent with respect to particular matters, elements, or bodies. Space has an appetite for matter, but is indifferent as to which kind of matter occupies it.
So this just felt like a lot of what I would call like purple prose almost, in that it's filler, it's fluff. Like you've definitely covered a lot of this specifically in the previous section, and I felt like it was redundant a moment ago. And maybe these are substantially different, but at least for me personally, I felt like I picked up what you're putting down over like here or whatnot. So I don't know how like other people feel about that in the chat, whether or not the idea of space and like the duality within it is different from what you were mentioning earlier. But to me, it just seems like they're a bit cut from a cloth. This part you should have cut down. Okay. Yeah. And again, like, don't try to like take this too negatively. I'm just trying to give you like my most honest feedback here.
Appetite.
And honestly, like cutting and trimming is probably the second hardest part of writing. Well, arguably the first, but of course, like that ties back into what I said earlier when I was saying like transitions are like the hardest part for me personally. And I feel like cutting down is just like a facet of like transitioning in some ways. Okay.
Into mystic philosophy that Bruno drew heavily from specifies the capacity of a thing to seek its good or proper end. Used more broadly, it includes the actual seeking as well. It is a tendency, an inclination, or direction. Appetite is both the fundamental power to seek and the actual exercise of that power. Appetite is attributed to all beings, from God, who has will, to primary matter, which has an appetite for form, or what makes a thing what it is. The fact that for...
So I liked that idea of tying it to appetite, and you had me up until you said primary matter has an appetite for form, or what makes a thing what it is. I would like... I don't necessarily want to say like an elaboration on what that means, but kind of an elaboration on what that means, because I feel like form is a bit of a loaded term, and you do kind of like justify what that is here, but I feel like there's probably more behind it that I don't have the full context on. Hey Chadwick, welcome back to stream.
Which has an appetite for form, or what makes a thing what it is. The fact that for Bruno, space desires matter differently is an argument in favor of the plenitude of space. Plenitude refers to the idea that the universe contains all possible forms of existence, and that everything that can exist does exist. This is supported by two other principles governing Bruno's thought. The first is the principle of plenitude. The second is Bruno's rejection of a distinction between the absolute and ordained power of God. Absolute power enables God to set aside...
All right, so that was like the perfect moment for you to tie it into Elden Ring and why this is how this ties back into the game, because this is more of like a Gnostic history lesson, which is perfectly fine, and I'm certain people would definitely be interested in Bruno's theories here, but I would say like the way to make those theories more accessible is to tie it to something more concrete, because we've been in such an abstract territory for so long. You will really need to sit down and like focus on the entirety of this video, and that's really difficult to do, especially if you have like other real life stuff going on in the background. And then if you get distracted by like for a moment and then we're coming back to something, it's really hard to follow the pacing of things. And I don't mean like the literal pacing here as much as it is like the absolute deluge of information, but to be fair, I also think a lot of that deluge of information is a bit superfluous in nature and could be condensed substantially so. So going back to that whole idea of a thesis statement, I think for you specifically with the way that this video is formatted, well, I do absolutely commend the way that you made your thesis statement earlier. I think if you took that logic and applied it to your source material and made thesis statements of your source materials and then expanded upon them and drew the connections that you see between the so-called source materials, thesis statements in your mind, and then tied that to the game, or like used the game first and then tied that into like this pattern of like ideas, that would probably be better for keeping an audience engaged overall. Biggest vice of the video is probably the over-reliance on the academic reference. This feels more like a Bruno video, not an Elden Ring video, if that makes sense. Oh no, definitely. I don't think that could even really be argued at this point, because so I don't know like if there's a numerical proper ratio you should have, but if you compare the amount of Elden Ring footage, the intro has a hefty amount of it, which I thought the intro was really good. Elden Ring and Hermeticism, we still have like Elden Ring footage. It's still connected. I thought this section of the video was good. Then we get to the alchemy of Elden Ring. I fell off a bit because I'm a bit of an alchemy hater, but it's still tied into Elden Ring. I thought this is still a pretty decent section of the video. Then we get to the Elden Ring's Demiurge, and then I feel like this might start to be okay. No, this part's okay, I think. Blood and Alchemy, no, we're still in the good lands. Yeah, this part was still good. Ancestral Followers of Nature, still on track with the Hawkshaw stuff. Yep, okay. All of this stuff is still tied to Elden Ring. I still understand what's going on. Yeah, so it's really when we get to the world of Giordano Bruno where it really takes a turn into like the esoteric stuff, where I'm still not entirely sure how this fits in, other than like just the general themes of like duality, a little bit of like the Gnosticism stuff, but yeah, I don't know. And then, okay, like after that, it's pretty much just all academic stuff. And then we got like the I Jupiter and then EG for, let's see how long. Ooh, almost like 13 minutes so far. So that's pretty rough. To be fair, this is like fairly deep into the video, but it can be a little bit fatiguing. Ponyboy would wager that the ratio would be 2 parts Elden Ring or 1 part academic rhetoric. I don't think it's fair to make like such distinctions or like to tie it into like a certain ratio of like Elden Ring stuff versus other stuff, just because like I think based on the quality of one's writing and their ability to argue or come up with interesting parallels, that number could fluctuate wildly. You could probably have a very fascinating like Elden Ring video where 95% of it isn't necessarily talking about Elden Ring, as long as that 5% of Elden Ring content does a lot of hefty living to connect the ideas together. Stella means this in the nicest way possible because tone doesn't translate well over text, but you had to get up to do something, and after coming back, you sort of forgot this is an Elden Ring video. Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism to make. So yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at for now. I'm only like halfway through. I'm not sure if I want to like stop now because there's no way I'll be able to get through the rest of it tonight, especially with as much as I've paused now, or go on a little bit further and like pick this up tomorrow. So I'll let Elden Enthusiast decide, because like I know they have their own real life schedule going on. Whether or not you want me to continue a little bit more for tonight, I could do like maybe up to an extra like 45 minutes or so before I need to like really close out the stream and get ready for night time and whatnot. So yeah, I can't guarantee that I'll get through the rest of it tomorrow as well, because I also made a commitment to Jarhead to like look at his video, but I also don't want to just like leave this completely unfinished. So it eases up a lot after the middle, and you make the biggest parallels clear. Okay. You have two hours before you got to sleep for an appointment tomorrow. How about we get through this rough patch as much as we can? Okay, fair enough. And thank you so much for like sticking through this and being very receptive to the feedback you've received so far. I know that can be pretty painful.
One ordained system and replace it with another. It involves willing the impossible, that which is not predetermined by any metaphysical or moral order. Ordained powers are actions that are possible within the framework of laws given by God Himself. Deviation from those laws is possible for God through the absolute power. Divine omnipotence involves the absolute power to enact anything that does not involve contradiction. God chooses or ordains a subset of compatible possibilities that constitute the world and its history as we know it. Theologians formulated the relationship as one between what God has done and what He could have done otherwise. Canon lawyers appropriate the distinction to describe the powers of the Pope to set aside ordained.
So yeah, I could see what you're going for with the God thing, but then the canon lawyers, that's just not needed.
Appropriate the distinction to describe the powers of the Pope to set aside ordained or enacted church law through the plenitude or absolute power of his office. Because papal power transcended enacted law.
And why is the Pope relevant here?
And popes.
And I'm just gonna like give you like really direct feedback here, just to like be not just direct, but like really brief feedback here, just to like speed up the pace. So this will probably be like the equivalent of like the 1 or 2 word comments that you'd probably have in like an actual essay that you'd give to an English professor or something. And of course, if you want me to elaborate a bit more, I will.
Who enacted laws were in some sense not subject to those laws. They could provide for exceptions or change enacted laws without contradiction. Applying the distinction between absolute and ordained power raised the possibility that God might intervene in the ordained system through His absolute power. Several different
Alright, I feel like I need to re-watch that because I'm still not exactly sure why this is relevant, even though you like literally just said that, and this could be a me problem.
Popes and monarchs who enacted laws were in some
I'm going to back up a little bit further.
through the plenitude or absolute power of his office. Because papal power transcended enacted law, and popes and monarchs who enacted laws were in some sense not subject to those laws, they could provide for exceptions or change enacted laws without contradiction. Applying the distinction between absolute and ordained power raised the possibility that God might intervene in the ordained system through his absolute power. Several different and incompatible systems of divine legislation have operated at different times during human history. God's absolute capacity to transcend any given ordained system and replace it with another has made such a switch possible without involving God in a contradiction of his nature.
Okay, I get what you're saying here, but I'm just not sure why this is relevant yet. And this has kind of been like the recurring issue so far since like this middle section of the video, that you're bringing up points which do kind of like build off of each other, but they're not it's not entirely clear why they're relevant beyond like abstractions, I guess.
Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction, which states that a thing cannot be and not be at the same time, served as the ultimate safeguard of rationality and certainty. The principle underscored God's freedom to set aside ordained laws without incurring any fault, obstacle, or contradiction. To put it another way, God's absolute and ordained power were distinct.
And just like on an academic note, when you're speaking to like a broader audience, it's a little bit strange to transition away from like Bruno and then appeal to another authority via Aristotle, because you haven't made it clear whether or not Aristotle's views are representative of Bruno's or like Gnosticism as a whole. My general impression was that I didn't necessarily know if Aristotle was a Gnosist? Anyway, I do know what you said here with like Aristotle's beliefs helping shape what came along later. I get that, but my initial reaction was like, oh, Aristotle, does he actually have a relation to this? It just, it just doesn't connect as well as I think it could.
Ordained laws.
Gnostic, yeah, that's the word. Thank you.
Fault, obstacle,
it's getting late.
To put it another way, God's absolute and ordained power were distinct.
Okay.
We have unlimited possibilities apart from self-contradiction available to God by virtue of his absolute power. We then have a limited range of possibilities, those of a finite cosmos, that he freely chose to entertain in his dealings with creation. To use an analogy, perhaps one could say the Elden Ring and its order represents the greater will's ordained power in the lands between. It could then be said that the greater will has also intervened, using its absolute power, such as when the Nox were banished underground.
Hold on.
Possibilities, apart from self-contradiction, available to God by virtue of his absolute power. We then have a limited range of possibilities, those of a finite cosmos, that he freely chose to entertain in his dealings with creation. To use an analogy,
I don't understand this analogy because I feel like you're working from a part to a whole, which I guess makes sense in a certain way, but it just seems like backwards. Like, why compartmentalize the greater will on the... Oh, okay. Maybe you're trying to argue that, like, the greater will doesn't necessarily represent the one great? Okay. I think I'm on board now. Okay, never mind. This might have been a skill issue.
Perhaps one could say the Elden Ring and its order represents the greater will's ordained power in the lands between. It could then be said that the greater will has also intervened, using its absolute power, such as when the Nox were banished underground.
Okay, yeah, no, that's where I got lost as well. So, if the greater will has absolute power, are we conflating the greater will with the one great within this analogy specifically. And this might have been like you misspeaking or something like that. But, damn it. Yeah, I could tell it's late because of the way I just lost my train of thought. Okay. So I felt like because the greater will, in my mind, is kind of like the absolute form of order as it exists right now, that it makes sense that it should have absolute power, but I don't understand why its absolute power would be derived from potentially its ordained
the
power.
Will's ordained power in the lands between.
Represents the greater will's ordained power. The Elden Ring and its order represents the greater will's ordained power. It could then be said that the greater will has also intervened using its absolute power. Okay, I was just misunderstanding. Okay, yeah. So I see. Elden Ring subservient to greater will. Okay, I get you. This is, definitely a skill issue on my part.
It could then be said that the greater will has also intervened, using its absolute power, such as when the Nox were banished underground. Bruno's reply was that this was philosophically incoherent. This distinction belittled God's powers, and so undermined, I quote, laws, religions, faith, and morality, end quote. This rejection enabled Bruno to affirm the necessary creation of the universe from God's power, while still not abolishing his freedom by embracing paradox. Bruno established a series of principles granting the absolute simplicity and unity of God's essence. All his attributes are coextensive in one. God acts with his one and unique production, the universe, with all his infinite power. As a result, the universe is infinite, eternal, and the infinite space is totally filled with matter. Bruno affirmed that intellect, universal soul, and matter are aspects or expressions of God. What about space? It could seem that the space God occupies was not of his own making, so how can one reconcile this observation? The answer is that infinite space is God's domain. In Bruno's words, I quote, the seat of God is, in fact, the universe in its entirety.
Elden says, oh God, skip this part? That's not how that works, my friend.
And in every part, the immense heaven, the void space whose plenitude he is, the Father of the light filling the darkness, ineffable, end quote. Matter and form, or soul, coincide in the one and single substance. It must be seen separately as the two principles of one substance.
Okay, yeah, that line right there is a little bit weird, because I was totally fine with what you said right before this, to be honest, and I felt like this was a little bit more tangible to Elden Ring, even if you haven't talked about Elden Ring in 20 minutes. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit there.
It must be seen separately as the two principles of one substance. Void is also a principle conceptually prior. It exists independently of the universe to which it offers a place or location. The heaven of heavens is the entire infinite space. It is called ether and filled by God as, all in all, God fills space and the universe that fills space.
Light and dark are one.
In 1591, Bruno's disciple, Hieronymus Spessler, wrote the Lampus. It aimed to offer a new presentation of Bruno's ontology.
I remember that Pokemon.
The revision replaces many of Bruno's initial statements that were not fully fleshed out until later in his life. It crucially translates metaphysical concepts into symbolic images. This was an imitation, Bruno said, of the method employed by ancient wisdom. Bruno's triad was influenced by the ancient wisdom of the Corpus Hermeticum, which I brought up earlier in this video. 6 primordial principles appear in 2 triads. They are called inferior and superior. Keep in mind that the adjectives inferior and superior have no real hierarchical importance. These opposite principles...
I have no idea what I'm trying to look at. Well, I mean, I understand like all the individual words and whatnot, but I don't understand why they are there the way that they are.
This was an imitation, Bruno said, of the method employed by ancient wisdom. Bruno's triad was influenced by the ancient wisdom of the Corpus Hermeticum, which I brought up earlier in this video. 6 primordial principles appear in 2 triads. They are called inferior and superior. Keep in mind that the adjectives
primordial principle, I need to know what that is before I need to worry about inferior and superior.
Inferior and superior have no real hierarchical importance. These opposite principles.
It might have been nice if you labeled primordial principles tier or something like that, just because, or like the primordial principles of X
exist together equally. Bruno's concept of the relation between God and space is in accordance with the 2 triads. Both triads represent Bruno's ontology, meaning the philosophical.
And I don't feel like I understand what triad means in this. Oh, there's 6. Wait, are we missing one of each? Yeah, I don't understand. Like, should I be reading it this way, like rows or columns, or like both?
Study of being. The 2 equal aspects of God's essence is a coincidence of opposites. We have potency and act, matter and form, void space and mind. God is thus space and matter, no less than mind and form. Bruno, relying on biblical passages, described God as a unity of contradictories. In each triad, the succession of the second and third with respect to a preceding member is described as one of Son and Father. The first, inferior triad is that of chaos, orcus, and nox. In order, they represent the void or space, the appetite of void, or passive potency, also known as privation, and matter. Chaos corresponds to void space. Orcus corresponds to appetite, or passive potency. Matter corresponds to nox. Between chaos, primum omnium, or the first of all, and night, the materia prima, there hides the liquid maelstrom of Orcus. All
right, so for this specifically, I have some like passing familiarity with like a little bit of Latin with like the nox meaning night, but I think for most people, they're not going to necessarily know that like nox means night or like lux means light. So it might be better to like redefine them or recontextualize them to be more accessible to a broader audience, so that way they're more easily on the same page. Because even with like that said, like matter means something specific in this context. So like matter isn't necessarily like a bad word. I'm not saying you should change it, but I don't necessarily know if like that same idea of this meaning matter within like a certain like defined context can be applied to another word like privation, or how exactly void is supposed to be differentiated from space and stuff like that. So I really have no idea why this is relevant. And in some ways, this kind of just obfuscates the point that I think you're trying to make. And it comes across as like an appeal to authority. And I'm not trying to say like you're doing this with like ulterior motives. You just understand the significance of this better than your audience does. So we either need to like take your word for it or just kind of like ignore what you're saying. And I don't think either options are good options there.
Between chaos, primum omnium, or the first of all, and night, the materia prima, there hides the liquid maelstrom of Orcus, or infinite desire. Desire is characterized by absence.
So, hold on. Oh, yeah. And then the other thing that I did want to say is like, this is actually kind of funnily one of the times where I didn't want Elden Ring imagery on the screen. I kind of wanted to like study the table a bit more as you're talking about it. So I definitely do appreciate when you did add in the blocks to segregate them and make it clear like that these 3 specifically are connected and that kind of thing.
Inferior triad is that of chaos, Orcus, and Nox. In order, they represent the void or space.
Yeah, because I have no idea what Orcus is.
Space, the appetite of void, or passive potency, also known as privation, and matter. Chaos, void.
Yeah, and that information is just like really quick, and with it all being like audio information and then the visual information being distinct from it, it makes it really hard for me to like tie what you're saying to the specific principle at hand.
Potency, also known as privation, and matter.
So hold on, damn it.
The appetite of void.
Appetite of void. Wait, in order to represent...
For passive potency.
Passive potency, also known as privation. Yeah, I'm just really confused here. Void space, privation. Yeah, I'm just kind of lost. I don't think I can like say more than that.
Set of chaos, Orcus, and Nox. In order, they represent the void or space. The appetite of void, or passive potency, also known as privation, and matter. Chaos corresponds to void space. Orcus corresponds to appetite or passive potency. Matter corresponds to Nox.
So, saying that they correspond to things could inadvertently mislead people in that way, like you're making, you're redefining the first thing that you're talking about. Although, obviously, I recognize that's not what you're trying to do here, but Orcus corresponds to passive privation and appetite. I'm not sure if that's like actually just redefining Orcus or if you're just saying synonyms for these terms.
Between chaos, primum omnium, or the first of all, and
so yeah, I don't know if you're like making a positive phrases here where you're just like redefining what chaos is, or if they like correspond to the thing, especially without the table to compare it to.
Night, the materia prima, there hides the liquid maelstrom of Orcus, or infinite desire.
So Orcus is a liquid maelstrom of infinite desire. Okay.
Desire is characterized by absence. Chaos is also absence, and its wonder rests in a desire to locate the origin of all things. However, this is impossible, and thus, chaos desire remains an undivided binomial. It is simultaneously the presence of absence and emptiness for all that is, present and full. Orcus was a god of the underworld and punisher of broken oaths in Roman religion. Orcus, or abyss, the appetite in void space, is described as the son of chaos. Chaos has no figure and cannot be imagined. It is space which can only be known through the things in it. It contains the infinite universe. Chaos is infinite appetite, an unending abyss of need, seeking after the infinity of his father. Perhaps those afflicted by the yellow flame of chaos inherit a desire to know the cause of all suffering in the world. This would be the split of the one great by the greater will. The mother of truth craves.
So I think that idea does have like a lot of parallels to the frenzy flame, as you brought up. I just wish like the rest of like this section preceding it was that more directly tied into Elden Ring to help crystallize those concepts in our minds here.
Wounds. The appetite of void brings to mind the formless mother craving wounds. The description of the serpent arrow states, arrow carved to resemble a flying snake, used in tandem with the serpent bow, loyal minions of the formless serpents, their fangs are daubed with deadly poison. There is also the great serpent, who perhaps too could be connected to formlessness through the formless serpents. Both the serpent and formless mother deal with desire, and the other seeking to devour endlessly. Perhaps they represent appetite and need in the cosmological sense like Orcus. I'd have to think about it more though. We then have night.
Damn, I was a little bit disappointed you didn't go a little bit further with that, and just left with I'll need to think about it more though, because if they do represent that, I still don't know like what that's supposed to say, other than there is like chaos, there is desire in Elden Ring, and there's also like chaos and desire in Gnosticism. I don't know like why the two should be like correlated, I guess, beyond just like what might be superficial connections.
Or Nox, matter. She is the daughter of Orcus. She stands for the materia prima, also known as prime matter in alchemy. In Roman mythology, Nox is the goddess and personification of night. I find it fascinating that the second female triad includes Nox. In Elden Ring, the Nox are a matriarchal society that await the age of the stars and their lord of night. Nox, being associated with void space, brings to mind Estelle, natural born of the void. I'll have to explore these connections in more detail some other time as well. The second, superior triad consists of Father, or God. He is also known as plenitude and mens, meaning mind. Father is the source of all being. We then have intellect, or the universal sun, the fount of ideas. Ideas here meaning essences of things. Then there is spiritus, known as lux, light, which is the spirit of all things. This light which fills all things and is diffused through all is called the anima mundi and spiritus universarum, the world or universal soul. God as mind is distinct from God absolute. Intellect is the son of Father. Spiritus is described as love. This is a derivation from the Christian Trinity, but with cosmological meaning. Infinite light is the type of Father. It is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, or absolute unity. Father, mind or mens, generates intellect with a son. Between them is fulgur, or light, love. One may contemplate in the Father the essence of essences. In the Son, the beauty and love of generating. In light, the spirit pervading and vivifying all. Light is associated with the vivifying power of the world soul. Nox, or night, the substrate or underlying substance of physical things, was first matter. It created the universe in combination with light. The sequence from the first to the third step in each triad is not a causal process. Every instance is co-eternal to the others. All aspects in each triad exist as aspects or conceptual moments in a single essence. Matter or Nox is related to spiritus, the universal soul. Orcus or privation relates to intellect. Chaos or void space corresponds to the Father. The relation within each pair is presented as that of a married couple. This appears more clearly in the relation between universal soul and matter, whose union produces the series of natural beings constituting the universe. From the union of Nox and Lux proceeds or results infinite matter informed with the infinite diversity of natural beings in the universe. We are then left with the pair chaos, void space, and Father, or mens, plenitude. Both are related as female and male. So then, the opposition of two infinite contraries is the ultimate cause of the universe. Father, also called God, would be the triad of light. The other would be chaos or void space, the triad of dark. The Lampus makes it clear that the three members of each triad are in reality one entity or essence, a triunity. This trinity has a cosmological dimension consisting of the infinite universe. Dixon, another disciple of Bruno, commented on the absoluteness of God and his incomprehensibility by the human intellect. He described God as being at the same time sublime light and so profound an abyss. God is the coincidence of contraries light, the universal soul and intellect, and darkness, matter and void space. They exist co-eternally to create the infinite universe as the ultimate contraries. Both light and matter, as filled space, belong equally to God, or they both coincide in the essence of God. Void or space is God himself, in the same way that he is the mind, intellect, spirit, filling it. God is...
So I feel like we're coming back to the issue that I raised in this section when I felt like it was kind of being redundant to what was brought up. I don't know, this section. Yeah, all things can be conjoined. I felt was like kind of redundant compared to what came before with the world of Giordano Bruno. I feel like we've just kind of like come full circle to make the same argument here, except in a slightly different form. Where like all things are contained within everything and kind of nothing at the same time. So without horns, thanks for dropping by as always, and you have a good night as well. And potentially Ponyboy too. I can't tell.
Space, no less than its plenitude. The chaos, abyss, darkness, no less than the mind, intellect, spirit. Both of these trinities are equivalent as well as one and the same essence. God and the infinite universe are one. As I've said before, the domain of God fills all of space. Bruno's unitary concept of God is thus coincidence of potency with act, and of void, privation, and space with mind, intellect, and soul. Infinite space is God no less than mind is God, being one of the two opposites coinciding in unity. Perhaps the spiral in Elden Ring symbolizes all contraries spiraling upwards to join with the maximum, God, as one, through the coincidence of opposites. The description for the law of causality states, causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation. Normally, causality can be defined as cause and effect.
Ooh, we got
It
Burke.
can also be defined as the principle that everything has a cause. In Bruno's universe, cause and effect are inseparable, the one being, in its noble aspect, as the universal soul and intellect acting upon matter, are the principal cause of all things, the living effects of the universe, a perfect unity. The law of causality to me, then, describes the unity present in everything through God in all things. The coincidence of opposites unifies all contraries on the grand scale of the universe as one. It is in Bruno's philosophy, or collectively, the individual cognitive acts of the infinite number of things, were the means where the universal soul and intellect bound the universe to its source, God. This impulse to adhere to him, love on a cosmic scale, ensured that the universe, having gone forth from God, preserved themselves by their impulse to return to him. I quote Bruno, "Everything naturally has a regressive drive toward its origins, and a progressive drive towards its own end and perfection." End quote. In Elden Ring, it seems to me...
So, right there, that kind of definitely is very reminiscent of the law of regression to me. So, I definitely see the ties where you're going for with that. And that's kind of like one of the more direct ones that has just kind of been implied. And I just kind of wish there were more moments like that in between like the middle section of the video so far. Well, the video buffers for some reason. Ponyboy says that symbol actually looks a lot like the Golden Order sigil. Yeah, I can see that, like the Elden Ring. Shaman. It's circling. Is my internet down? No, my OBS says I'm still like transmitting. I see my stream is circling. It's gonna be really lame if so we're gonna have to stop. All right, so we're at an hour.
To me that through the light of love with spiritus that fills the entire world, all things yearn eternally to converge with the one deity, the law of regression and action. I quote, God determined and ordered, nature executed and produced. End quote. For Bruno, nature was the universal soul and intellect, acting as the efficient cause within natural things. It was the act of creation that divided matter, operating within it non-discursively, meaning without words or language. Bruno's philosophy was monistic. It was governed by the idea that the one being was conceived in two modes as an absolute first principle. Its epiphany, the universe, was the only truly existent thing, all other things being accidents of it. It was undivided in its essence, and wholly present throughout its body. However, it was divided in that in its acts and operations, it existed in one way, in one thing, and in another thing. Though indivisible in substance, the world's soul was multipliable, just as a single voice can be heard in innumerable places indivisibly, while heard everywhere, it remained whole and divided nowhere. The greater will or Jove, the universal soul, acted to create by fracturing the one great as a demiurge, dividing matter. Despite these fractures, everything remained whole in the same essence, and divided in their individual things as accidents, as a result of the split. To shamelessly steal an analogy from fellow lore tuber, Protagonist, we used it in regards to the one great and its fracture. Imagine a mirror that is whole, then broken. The shattered pieces are separate and distinct, yet all are still glass. I say that for the inhabitants of the lands between, this is...
The funniest thing is, I literally have no recollection of that. What did I say?
mirror that is whole, then broken. The shattered pieces are separate and distinct, yet all are still glass. I say that for the inhabitants of the lands
I don't remember if I would say that they're all still glass, but I think, yeah, okay. I said it in Discord, maybe.
between. This is the true nature of reality around them. Bruno himself used the same analogy of a mirror as well, to describe the state of all souls. Individual souls are like fragments of a broken mirror, which represent...
Okay, now I kind of remember. Vaguely. I could see where I would make that distinction when talking about the one great specifically. Okay.
It's the world soul. The image of the sun in an intact mirror is a replica of the sun in the sky. If the mirror shatters, some pieces will display a complete image of the sun.
Yep,
However,
I'm tracking.
Some fragments will reflect only an indistinct or even unrecognizable image of it. Similarly, the world soul, by engaging with matter, becomes divided, and together with it, it will produce a multiplicity of animals, or at least, animate things. If the corporeal universe was a mirror of God, the individual corporeal things of which it was constituted were its parts. Its fragments each contained an image of him. To put it another way, embodied souls were in communion with God, not by consuming a piece of a consecrated host, such as the Christian rite of the Eucharist, where bread and wine is consumed. They are instead embodied instances of the world soul, God and things. Bruno did not believe a demiurge created the universe, as his universe always existed, perfect and eternal. However, I see our Jove, the greater will, representing the Christianity Bruno opposed. I believe FromSoft chose to have a demiurge figure drawing from Gnostic myths create the...
Right, let me back that up again. I just want to... Oh, damn it. At least I know it was like at 1 hour and 3 minutes-ish. Okay. Jove, the greater will, represents the Christianity Bruno opposed. Okay, so with that there, I'm like, then why did I just listen to all this stuff about Bruno? Like, that's like my knee-jerk reaction. I'm not fully following you here, at least right now. We're buffering again.
The Christianity okay. Bruno opposed. I believe FromSoft chose to have a demiurge figure drawing from Gnostic myths create the material realm. This, I say, was done to highlight the opposing ideologies of Bruno and the Orthodox Church. I view it as a seemingly distant moral force, existing apart from the inhabitants of the lands between. It uses an Empyrean to enforce order upon the world, having little to do with us, except through its vassals, the Two Fingers, and the Elden Beast. The greater will brought about the world through fractures, who I conceive being the world's soul or will, not the true first principle, which I view as the one great. The flame of frenzy and its followers seek to break down all distinctions brought by the greater will and the golden order. They wish to do so by forcibly burning down the world. However, due to the overwhelming emotion of despair or the flame of frenzy's nature, they do not realize or omit that all is already one.
Okay, so yeah, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down here. I'm not entirely sure how clear it'd be for those who are not like super well versed in the text here, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but in your estimation, the one great contains the greater will and everything else within it, and the greater will isn't necessarily distinct from the one great because it's part of the one great, but due to the nature of the one great being like multiplicitous, it kind of necessitates a state in the so-called universe or world to naturally break and divide itself to become multiplicitous or to kind of reaffirm itself essentially. And such is why we have the greater will being an instantiation of the one great, yet not fully representative of the one great. And so Ponyboy said, you do have a particular issue and you're not a scholar, but if Jove is the Christian god, then that would mean Jove is the demiurge, not the world soul. At least if we're relating this to Gnosticism, the world soul didn't choose to fracture itself. Sophia chose to make a divine being in the material world. Okay, so Elden said pretty much. Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Multiplicity, opposites, and contraries play a major role in game. For example, we have Margit and Morgott, along with this opposite, Moog. There is also Radagon and Marika, a grand paradox, who are in opposition to each other. The world is made up of opposites, like Bruno's universe, and can be reconciled with the fact that all is one. As Muriel says,
heresy is not native to the world. It is but a contrivance. All things can be conjoined.
The Nox are in opposition to their ideological counterpart, the greater will, or the world soul, Lux. Yet both exist co-eternally on the cosmological scale, Lux and Nox, light and darkness, constituting the universe.
Okay, so that's probably a good spot to stop for me for the night, at least. Okay, so Ponyboy just said, that's why the demiurge is so problematic. They're essentially an infinite being cursed into a finite material existence. Well, to make an analogy to Magic the Gathering, I think one decent way to try to, like, reconcile such an idea could be exemplified with the Eldrazi. And because, like, Magic is so nerdy, and I know everybody in chat knows what an Eldrazi is. Let me go ahead and not look it up for you guys. So, in Magic the Gathering, the Eldrazi, this probably isn't the best terminology for it, are like a kind of a race or series of a species of like extraplanar beings. And what I mean by that is, they're essentially like space aliens that travel between dimensions, really. So anyway, one of the coolest ways I've ever heard the Eldrazi being described is like, imagine being a fish and you're in a body, like let's say a pond. You're a fish in a pond, and a person puts their hand in the water, except rather than like submersing their whole hand, you only see each of their 5 fingers. However, the way that you look at each finger, it only shows the finger itself. So you see 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 finger, 5 finger. You don't see that they're all connected to the palm of the hand and whatnot. So to the perspective of a fish, you might see like 5 distinct beings and not be able to perceive the whole hand that each finger is attached to being part of a greater organism, which would be like the Eldrazi. So when you encounter an Eldrazi in Magic the Gathering, you can, kind of technically defeat the Eldrazi, but it's only like the equivalent of a fish biting the finger on a hand that got put in the water. The fish doesn't really do anything to the human, which is like putting their hand in the water, but it kind of can give the appearance that they've defeated the Eldrazi. So that's kind of like one way I think you might be able to compare the Eldrazi to the Demiurge. And if you want to talk about like infinity and like physicality and stuff, like the Demiurge could be the equivalent of an Eldrazi, where like the main host body just cannot physically be fully contained within the physical material world, and so you're only seeing essentially the tip of their finger rather than the hand or the rest of the body, which is what the Demiurge represents in this analogy here. Someone tried to teach you how to play Magic the Gathering once. It's a fun game. It's probably too complicated for its own good in some ways. But yeah, I have mixed feelings about it now. I haven't really liked a lot of the new crossover events because I feel like it just really diluted the core identity of Magic. And sure, it's like side content, but it would have been one thing if they were like non-tournament legal or like certain formats couldn't play with them. But anyway, moving on from that. Eldon said to Ponyboy that what he's getting at is that the Greater Will is the Demiurge who fractured the One Great, and in the fractures that occurred, the One Great is now the One, and the Greater Will is an omnipresent animating force in this new fractured universe. And then Ponyboy says, totally, but the issue with that is that the Greater Will can't be omnipresent because in the Gnostic relation, that would be the One Great. Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think like the greater will represents an aspect of the one great, and everything is the one great. So it is divided, but it's not individual. Like, everything is still part of the one great, I think, in Elden Enthusiast's cosmology here. And so you could say, like, the one great is simultaneously divided, yet it's still whole by virtue of being the one great. And that might be his overall encompassing argument of there being a hidden god within Elden Ring. I'm assuming. Obviously, I haven't watched the rest of the video, but that's just kind of what I'm getting so far. Magic Gathering is now the card version of Fortnite? Oh, okay, because of the crossovers, yeah. I was going to be like, are you kidding me? Magic is like way before Fortnite, but yeah, I see what you're saying there. Teddy says, yeah, we only see things in 3D while the gods and demons function on more dimensions, so what we perceive of them is ultimately not the whole picture of them. Exactly. Okay, and Elden is saying, we're talking more Bruno than Gnosticism. Okay. Okay, so that'll be it for me for tonight. I'm not sure I'll get to the rest of your video, Elden Enthusiast, but I do want to thank you so much for like sharing this with us. And I do think it's a gargantuan effort, especially for a very first video. And I'm impressed with how decent the production quality is, because it's definitely on par with like a lot of other content creators there. Obviously, like, with experience, some things will hopefully get ironed out, like the whole like talking and delivering lines and whatnot, and that's just a real pain in the ass. But yeah, no, for real, definitely very nice job on a first video so far. So if anybody is wanting to support our good community friend Elden Enthusiast, I've gone ahead and linked the video into chat if you want to give them a like and or a sub yourself. And remember, that was their first video. And V-Limit says, it's incredible for a first video. Honestly, incredible for a video in general. Okay, so yeah, that'll be it for tonight, everybody. Tomorrow I'll be looking at one of Jarhead's videos released right before like the DLC trailer got dropped. So stay tuned for that. We'll be going live again 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then potentially Hollow Knight on Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. Okay. That'll be it for me. Take care. Stay safe. Last Protagonist out.